Oh, ooh! The party members let out wild cheers, their eyes sparkling with excitement as they rushed to the treasure chest. Upon inspecting its content up close, they screamed in disbelief. My God, it's gold, real gold. Inside the chest were a significant number of gold coins, countless silver coins, intricately crafted ornaments that seemed to radiate artistic value, and small gemstones glinting under the light. This is unbelievable, the party members exclaimed. Even Hayes, who should have been above greed, couldn't hide her excitement. The treasure was simply too overwhelming. Casson, unsurprisingly, was even more affected. His eyes practically bulged out of their sockets as he greedily examined each piece of wealth, overwhelmed by the sheer scale of riches that defied easy calculation. Oh my! Kettle approached the chest with an amused expression. Picking up a gold coin, he flicked it into the air. The coin spun in a glittering arc before landing squarely in Kettle's hand. Casson, how much do you think this is worth? I can't calculate it right now. My God, a reward of this magnitude. So that much, huh? Judging by the reaction, the treasure seemed to be an abundant and overflowing reward. Though the material wealth intrigued Kettle, his interest lay elsewhere. What should I call you? Kettle asked, his gaze fixed on the ghost. You may call me whatever you wish. Administrator, manager, ghost, it matters not. Then I'll just call you Ghost. Is this all there is for the reward? Kettle asked. For now, yes. Is there something more you desire? It's nothing major. I'd just like to ask a few questions. Questions, you say? The ghost looked momentarily flustered. It was unusual for an adventurer to ask for something other than treasure after clearing a dungeon. Regaining its composure, the ghost replied calmly. Clearing the maze means everything here is your reward. If you wish to ask questions, you may. I will answer what I can. That's a generous offer, Kettle said with a grin. What happens to you once the maze is cleared? I disappear, the ghost answered indifferently. I am the manager of the dungeon. Once the maze is cleared, I serve no purpose. I will vanish alongside the maze. That will be the end of me. I see. Kettle stroked his chin, his narrowed eyes scrutinizing the ghost. It was a sentient being, intelligent enough to rival any human. He could not believe such a being could exist solely as a mere tool for the dungeon. After organizing his thoughts, Kettle asked, Were you born with the dungeon? Yes, the ghost replied. As the dungeon's manager, I assume you cannot leave it. That is correct. But that's odd. You claimed even a hero couldn't break the laws of the maze. That's information you shouldn't know unless you had knowledge of the outside world. The ghost explained matter-of-factly. I possess general knowledge of the outside world. It has been with me since the moment I came into existence. So, the one who created you must have had a fundamental understanding of this world's principles and concepts, Kettle concluded. That would seem to be the case. The ghost appeared momentarily startled, as if it had never considered the nature of its creator. Kettle studied it with a growing sense of intrigue. Who could your creator be, I wonder? It had to be someone capable of crafting such an intelligent being as merely a dungeon manager, someone knowledgeable about the world beyond. Kettle wondered whether perhaps this creator had a hand in designing every dungeon in existence. This world just keeps getting more fascinating, Kettle said with a delighted laugh. With the dungeon cleared, Kettle and his party returned to the guild hall, laden with treasures. Mercenaries and guild staff were dumbfounded. News of Kettle venturing into the unexplored dungeon had spread quickly, and most had assumed they would never see him again. The phrase unexplored dungeon carried a heavy weight. The dungeon Kettle had targeted had existed for decades, and no one had ever returned alive. However, Kettle had returned, victorious with a trove of wealth to prove it. Rosa hesitated as she inspected the hall. Incredible, such quantity and quality. Even assessing it took considerable time. During that period, Rosa listened as Kettle recounted his experience in the unexplored dungeon. As their name implied, unexplored dungeons were dungeons whose information remained unknown. The details Kettle provided were invaluable. After hearing his account, Rosa nodded thoughtfully. I see. From your description, it seems to be a fairly standard dungeon. In that case, clearing it shouldn't be impossible for advanced adventurers. I'd say it's around the level of an A-rank dungeon. Do sentient entities usually appear in A-rank dungeons? Kettle asked. They're rare but not unheard of. As you mentioned, sentient beings occasionally appear in A-rank dungeons or higher, though they're still exceptionally uncommon. Listening to Kettle's account, the dungeon seemed like a textbook example of an A-rank dungeon. A highly skilled individual, such as an advanced adventurer, could use mist to detect a wide area and navigate the maze efficiently. While the lack of prior information posed a challenge, a well-prepared advanced adventurer should theoretically be able to clear it. However, there was one issue. You said you destroyed the maze's walls, right? That's a bit concerning, Rosa said. This point raised uncertainty. If the maze's walls could indeed be destroyed, an advanced adventurer could easily manage to clear the dungeon. However, if they were indestructible, the difficulty would increase dramatically. According to what the ghost has said, altering the maze's structure was impossible, and that included destroying its walls. Yet Kettle claimed he had broken through them to solve the maze. There was no problem breaking the walls. The ghost must have misunderstood something, Kettle stated confidently. That could be it. I have heard of sentient entities deceiving mercenaries before, so it might be one of those cases, Rosa replied thoughtfully. The notion of breaking the dungeon's laws was unheard of. Most likely, wall destruction didn't fall under the category of alteration. With that reasoning, Rosa concluded her assessment. The unexplored dungeon was now classified as an A-rank dungeon. Finally, the calculation of the rewards was completed. The treasure was worth enough for an average person to live comfortably for several years. Kettle divided the sum into 4 equal portions and distributed them to his companions. Casson panicked and waved his hands in protest. No, I can't accept all of this. We didn't contribute at all. From beginning to end, Kettle had cleared the dungeon on his own. The others felt too ashamed to take a share. We're comrades, aren't we? It's true that you didn't accomplish much in this dungeon, but we're still part of the same party. I see no need to distinguish between us, Kettle replied. Kettle, their faces were filled with emotion. Even so, their conscience wouldn't allow them to accept a full quarter of the treasure. After much refusal, they settled for taking only 10%. I wouldn't mind keeping my full share, Alexandros muttered quietly, only to fall silent under the glares of Casson and Hayes. Let's meet again next time, Kettle said. Yes, they replied. There was no longer any hesitation or discomfort toward the barbarian. Kettle was genuinely kind and noble-hearted. While some might dismiss such behavior as naive or exploitable, they couldn't help but be moved by his sincerity. If you ever find yourself interested in our God, please visit our holy sanctuary, Hayes said earnestly, as she made a determined expression. Oh, are you sure? Kettle asked. Yes, as a priestess of Kaloja, I grant you permission to enter. The holy sanctuary was a place restricted even among clergy, with only a select few allowed access. Granting Kettle permission was the greatest gesture of gratitude Hayes could offer. Please accept this. Hayes handed Kettle a decorative object, an intricately designed ornament of curious form. She smiled warmly. With this, you will be permitted entry to our holy sanctuary. Though Kaloja is not widely welcomed, if you're willing, we would be honored to have you. Receiving permission from one who serves a god, this is a rare privilege, Kettle said with a broad smile, bowing respectfully as he accepted the ornament. His sincerity left Hayes deeply touched. Casson hesitated for a moment before pulling something from his pocket. Kettle, please accept this as well. What is this? Kettle asked. It's a pass to the Thieves' Guild. With this, you will be allowed into the guild halls of the Thieves' Guild. Wow, is that true? Alexandros and Hayes exclaimed in surprise. The Thieves' Guild was notoriously secretive. Its guild halls were unknown even to most adventurers, and even those aware of their existence required permission to enter. The Thieves' Guild was a true enigma, its activities shrouded in mystery. While many falsely claimed association with the guild, genuine members were exceedingly rare. Thus, Cassan's revelation left the others stunned. Scratching his head awkwardly, Cassan explained, "I don't have much skill or rank, but I was born and raised there. It's not as grand as the rumors make it out to be. If you ever get the chance, I'd be grateful if you visited." "I'll gladly accept," Kettle replied, taking the ornament with a smile. All eyes then turned to Alexandros. Noticing their gazes, he stammered nervously and spoke in rapid succession. "I'd like to give you something too, but unfortunately I'm currently in training and can't afford to give anything to anyone. I'm truly sorry." "No need to worry. It's understandable," Kettle said reassuringly, smiling as though it didn't bother him at all. Alexandros lowered his head in dejection. "Well then, everyone, let's meet again. Hopefully in the near future," Kettle said. Yes, unlike before, they parted ways with cheerful expressions. Kettle took his newfound wealth and headed straight to commission a set of clothes. After an extended session of taking measurements, the tailor finally provided an estimate. It required a significant amount of money, but that didn't concern Kettle. Once he accepted the price, the tailor informed him that creating the clothes would take a fair amount of time. "The wait will be part of the joy," Kettle thought as he cheerfully finalized the reservation. Even after ordering the clothes, a substantial amount of money remained. Contemplating how to spend it, Kettle came to a decision. I should save it for now. This was a fantasy world, full of uncertainties. He didn't know what rare and valuable items could become available for him in the near future. Running out of funds at a critical moment could spell disaster. Being prudent seemed like the wisest choice for now. "I wonder if there's a black market around here," he mused. A market filled with rare and exotic goods. It was a staple of fantasy settings, and it seemed plausible that such a place could exist. He thought perhaps asking Kine or Lord Barkan would yield some answers. With a sense of excitement, he moved on. Rosa had mentioned that a promotion review was underway following his successful dungeon clearance. The results were expected to be announced later that day. Will I finally be promoted to E rank? He wondered. This world never failed to surprise him, not even for a single day. As he walked with anticipation and delight, something caught his eye. Bending down, he picked up a small object from the ground and examined it with interest. It was a small, jet-black orb that shimmered with an enchanting brilliance. "What's this?" Kettle muttered to himself. The surface of the orb was smooth to the touch. Upon closer inspection, it was a perfect sphere. This was a fantasy world, devoid of machinery. Even shaping an orb into such a flawless sphere would require considerable skill. Yet here it was, lying on the ground. Could it be a gemstone? He thought. It didn't quite seem like one. Kettle stared at the orb curiously. Inside the sphere, something seemed to ripple, a dense, black substance swirling within. After examining it for a moment, Kettle slipped the orb into his pocket. He then made his way to the guild hall, where Rosa greeted him with exciting news. "Kettle, congratulations! You've been promoted from F-rank mercenary to E-rank mercenary." "Oh, really?" Kettle's face lit up with joy, his emotions clear for all to see. Rosa couldn't help but smile at his enthusiasm. "Yes, congratulations." "So what changes now?" Kettle asked eagerly. "I'll explain everything, but first, here's your new mercenary badge," Rosa said, handing him the upgraded badge. It was far more intricately designed and polished than the previous one. With a serious expression, she began her explanation. "Becoming E-rank increases the number of requests you can take. From now on, you will be permitted to explore certain dungeons alone up to a specific rank." "Oh," Kettle said, pleased. Finally, he could officially clear dungeons by himself. That alone was satisfying news. Rosa continued her explanation. "With your E-rank badge, you will gain access to most locations. While restricted areas like the royal capital or major churches remain off-limits, you should find very few obstacles in your path. An E-rank mercenary was a certified individual, backed by the mercenary guild itself, a clear acknowledgement of Kettle's trustworthiness. Rosa, however, sounded a bit regretful as she added, "Honestly, considering you cleared an unexplored dungeon, you should have been promoted even higher." After all, Kettle had cleared an A-rank dungeon. From the accounts of his party members, it was effectively a solo accomplishment. That alone warranted a higher rank. Kettle, however, shrugged it off as if it were only natural. "That's a matter of trust, not skill. It can't be helped." "You're absolutely right," Rosa replied, nodding, but she couldn't help marveling at him. This barbarian is incredibly sharp. Though he looked like a barbarian, he was more intelligent than anyone she had ever met. Perhaps, she wondered, if anyone could become the guild's first A-rank mercenary, it could just be Kettle. Yet, she found the thought oddly unappealing. An exceptional mercenary reflected well on the guild leader, and Rosa had no love for her current boss. Still, she asked cautiously, "What are your plans now? As an E-rank mercenary, you're no longer bound to this estate." "That's true," Kettle replied thoughtfully. With his new rank, he could enter other estates freely, avoiding bureaucratic hassles simply by presenting his badge. He stroked his chin, considering his options. The only estate he knew was this one. Exploring others intrigued him. He wondered what they would be like and how they would differ from here. "But for now, I think I'll stay a bit longer. I haven't fully enjoyed everything this place has to offer yet," Kettle said. "Is that so? Well, do as you please. You're a free man now," Rosa said. "That's right, I'm free," he replied cheerfully. As their conversation neared its end, he seemed to remember something. "Oh, can I ask you a question?" "Of course. What is it?" Kettle pulled the black orb from his pocket. "Do you know what this is?" Rosa carefully took the orb and examined it carefully. "It doesn't look like a gemstone. Judging by its smooth surface, it's been crafted by someone. There's no name or marking, but it seems quite valuable." As she muttered to herself, her eyes gradually grew vacant. Her expression turned dazed, as though she were entranced by the orb itself. With a sharp snap of his fingers, Kettle created a loud sound that startled her out of her stupor. Rosa jolted and looked at him in confusion. "Are you all right?" Kettle asked. "Why, what's going on?" Rosa replied, bewildered. "I should be asking you that. You seemed mesmerized by the orb." "Was I? I don't recall." Rosa looked genuinely confused, seemingly unaware she had been entranced. Kettle studied her for a moment before shaking his head. "Never mind. Well, identifying this orb is going to be difficult. It feels like it has an unusual aura, but I'm not sure. Should I have it appraised?" The guild hall often handled unidentified items, especially dungeon rewards. However, Kettle declined. "No need, thanks. I'll figure it out myself. That's part of the fun." "As you wish. There's no problem with that," Rosa replied. "Now then, could I see the quest board? I need to pick a job for today. Surely there are new assignments for an E-rank mercenary like me." Kettle's face brimmed with anticipation as Rosa smiled and brought out the quest board. Kettle handled the jobs given to E-rank mercenaries, finding each one fresh and engaging. He thoroughly enjoyed them. Late at night, after completing his tasks, he returned to his lodging. The innkeeper greeted him with a familiar smile, having grown accustomed to his presence. Once back in his room, Kettle retrieved the orb from his pocket. "What could this be?" he mused. The orb shimmered with a dark, rippling light. It wasn't a gemstone, nor did anyone seem to know who had crafted it. He was wondering why something that appeared valuable enough to command attention had been discarded on the ground like trash. "Rosa seemed mesmerized by it," he muttered. "Does it have some kind of function?" Kettle fiddled with the orb, turning it over in his hands. Then, without warning, a voice echoed in the air. "Come." "Huh," Kettle was startled. "Come to me." The voice was deep and resonant, striking a chord within his very soul. It carried a sinister tone, like a breath laden with malice, intent on unsettling the mind. Most people, like Rosa, would have fallen under the orb's spell, moving mindlessly in accordance with its command. "Why is this orb talking to me?" Kettle said aloud, tilting his head in curiosity. Yet the voice seemed to have no effect on him. He simply stared at the orb, puzzled. "Come to me." The voice persisted, but Kettle remained unaffected. "What is this thing?" Along with the voice, an image of a location formed in Kettle's mind. "Come to me," the voice continued its insistent plea. "Is it asking me to go there?" Kettle asked himself. He studied the orb for a moment, his expression shifting into one of intrigue. An artifact, maybe. "Come to me." The orb repeated its call, and even provided the exact location in his mind, as though guiding him. Kettle's curiosity deepened. "I guess I'll check it out." He then got up to his feet. He left the estate behind, walking swiftly with the location fixed in his mind, the voice continuing its chant. "Come to me." "I'm on my way, so shut it," Kettle muttered irritably. With swift and purposeful strides, he arrived at his destination. So this is it. It appeared to be an ordinary thicket, but Kettle's keen eyes noticed something hidden within. He stepped forward, and as he did, the camouflage faded, revealing the entrance. It was a cave. From the outside, it looked like nothing more than a typical, unremarkable cavern. Had he stumbled upon it during his travels, he might have dismissed it without a second thought. But now, his expression lit with interest. A hidden dungeon, perhaps. "Come to me." "All right, I'm here," he replied brusquely. Without hesitation, he stepped into the cave. Deep within the cave, a being became aware of an intruder's presence. He clacked his jaw together and laughed. "Another sacrificial lamb has wandered in." Clack, clack. The sound of bone striking bone echoed. This was no ordinary skeleton. His body was entirely devoid of flesh, made up solely of bones. From the hollow sockets of his skull burned an intense blue flame made of pure mana. This was a Lich, a being attainable only by the mightiest of mages. Through the glow of the flame, the Lich saw the cave's entrance and the figure of a massive barbarian walking in with an amused expression. A foolhardy barbarian. Judging by his size, he will make a fine offering, the Lich mused with glee, the flames in his sockets flaring in response to his emotions. 10 now, it's close, so close. Soon I will be reborn. The Lich had once been a notorious mage, infamous for his mastery of sinister magic that manipulated emotions and disrupted minds. With his spells, he had dominated multiple kingdoms, controlling the minds of kings to incite wars that led to countless lives lost and nations obliterated. Eventually, his heinous deeds crossed the line, and he was hunted down by heroes. But the Lich had foreseen his eventual downfall. Being a mage of great power, he had created a phylactery in advance, ensuring his resurrection as a Lich. However, the heroes struck faster than he had anticipated, and disaster struck. The core of his mana was destroyed, leaving him entirely drained of power. Normally, such a blow would have reduced him to an ordinary skeleton, aimlessly roaming the land in obscurity. "If not for this, I'd have been doomed," the Lich muttered. On his staff sat a translucent gray cube, an artifact acquired during his conquest of a ruined kingdom. The artifact stored mana independently, allowing its wielder to cast spells even without their own reserves. Thanks to this extraordinary item, the Lich was able to survive and sustain his resurrection. Without it, he would have been indistinguishable from any other skeleton. Still, he needed a solution to restore his lost mana. It wasn't long before he discovered the quickest path, using human life as a sacrifice to reconstruct his mana core. To achieve this, he needed a significant number of lives. Thus, he settled near an isolated estate, far from prying eyes but close enough to a population to gather sacrifices. He scattered enchanted orbs throughout the area, each capable of alluring people into his lair. One by one, his victims came, drawn by the orb's spell. He would capture them and drain their vitality and souls, adding their essence to his own. Slowly but surely, his mana returned. He was nearing the culmination of his plan, poised to reclaim his power and once again dominate the world. But a barbarian? What is one doing here? The Lick was puzzled. This cave was near a remote estate, chosen precisely to avoid attention. The presence of a barbarian, a rare sight outside the northern regions, was unexpected. Coming all the way from the north, I see. No matter, his size makes him an excellent offering, the Lick murmured, pleased as he observed the barbarian's movements. But after a moment of watching, the Lick frowned. His gait is far too steady. Those ensnared by the orb's magic typically moved sluggishly, their expressions vacant, as if their minds were elsewhere. Yet the barbarian walked briskly, and with purpose, his face even showing hints of a smile. Could he have resisted the orb's allure? The Lick thought. He briefly entertained the thought but dismissed it quickly. The orb had a failsafe. It would not activate for individuals attuned to the mist of the world. Only those ignorant of mist could be influenced by its magic. In the end, this barbarian was no more than an ordinary man, unversed in the mist. Any signs of resistance were merely coincidental. "Come forth, barbarian," the Lick intoned. From the depths of the cavern, the lurking evil issued a declaration of his approaching prey. "Become the cornerstone of my grand resurrection." His mocking voice reverberated through the hollow chamber, filled with a chilling menace. Kettle strolled leisurely, his steps measured. He could sense a location that appeared to be an exit. "Have I arrived?" he murmured, a flicker of excitement crossing his face once more. He pushed against the door barring his path, and with a grating creak, it swung open, revealing the interior. It was a vast chamber. Grotesque decorations made of bones adorned the room, and at its center stood a throne constructed entirely of skulls. Sitting upon it was a skeleton with glowing blue eye sockets. In the Lick's bony grasp were a spellbook and a staff, clear indicators of his identity. Kettle's eyes gleamed with recognition. "It's a Lick," he exclaimed. "A Lick, a genuine Lick." The Lick was a being that marked the pinnacle of a mage's craft, a soul infused into a phylactery, granting him immortality as long as the vessel remained intact. He was a staple figure among the villains of fantasy worlds. Though in recent stories, liches often appeared in more neutral roles or even as allies to the protagonist, they remained quintessential figures of fantasy lore. Kettle trembled with excitement. He had come here on a whim, driven by curiosity, and never imagined he would encounter a Lick. It was as if he had struck gold in the most unexpected place. He was ecstatic. "What are you?" the Lick demanded, perplexed. Kettle's expression overflowed with joy as he observed the monster. His focused gaze and coherent response suggested he hadn't lost his sanity. The Lick's voice carried a note of suspicion. "You are unaffected by the orb's enchantment." "Ah, so that's how you bring people here," Kettle said, nodding as understanding dawned. The Lick's glowing eye sockets flared. What's going on? The Lick thought. He could sense the mana of the orb emanating from Keta, which meant the orb had led him here. Yet, he remained unaffected by its hypnotic power. There was no indication that Kettle possessed any extraordinary abilities. He appeared to be nothing more than an ordinary barbarian. The situation defied comprehension. After a brief silence, the Lick spoke again. "You possess an artifact that shields your mind." And not just any artifact. It had to be an epic artifact, so advanced that even the Lick had failed to detect it. How a barbarian could come to possess such an artifact was beyond his understanding. Still, there was no other explanation. It doesn't seem like he came here deliberately, the Lick thought. If that was the case, the barbarian had to have stumbled upon the artifact by sheer luck. Kettle titled his head, puzzled. "I don't have anything like that." "Do you think you can fool me?" the Lick scoffed. "No matter, I accounted for unforeseen variables." The Lick waved his staff, and a gray artifact glowed in response. Immediately, the scattered bone fragments in the chamber began to rise and assemble themselves. As a master of magic, the Lick was adept at anticipating and neutralizing variables. He had prepared for this scenario long before it occurred. If you had succumbed to the orb's enchantment, you would have passed on painlessly. But since that isn't the case, I will crush you with brute force. Minions, attack. With a rattling clatter, the skeletons lunged toward Kettle. I see what's going on here, Kettle murmured with a smirk. This was no ordinary dungeon. It was the lair of an evil lick, a sinister place designed to lure curious wanderers using enchanted orbs, only to turn them into sacrifices. While the orbs weren't merely objects of curiosity, but true vessels of seductive allure, Kettle wasn't aware of their full power. You're skinnier than I thought, Kettle said. Let's see if that tongue of yours can still wag after I've severed your limbs. You only need to stay alive. That's all that matters. Cut him down. With that command, the skeletons charged forward, rusty swords in hand. These were no ordinary skeletons found in dungeons. They were crafted by the Lick himself, stronger and deadlier than anything a typical barbarian should be able to face. 5 of these skeletons surged toward Kettle. The Lick was confident they would tear him apart, leaving him a writhing, screaming mess. The thought of the barbarian's anguished cries brought a sadistic smile to the Lick's face. Kettle clenched his fist as the first skeleton approached, its rusted blade raised high. With a single, decisive punch, he obliterated the skeleton's skull. The headless creature crumbled instantly, its bones scattering across the floor. What? The Lick froze in shock. Kettle nodded, almost as if approving of his own work. It's nothing special. If you take out the head, they're done. The remaining skeletons rushed him, weapons ready to strike. Kettle dodged nimbly, grabbing one by the arm. Crack. The bones snapped like a dry twig. Kettle swung the severed arm like a club, smashing it against another skeleton's head, shattering the skull into pieces. He stepped forward, flicking his fingers as though giving a playful tap, but the force crushed a skeleton's skull into fine dust. Oops, Kettle said. He sidestepped another blade aimed at his back, effortlessly catching it before slicing through the attacking skeleton's neck. The lifeless bones clattered to the floor. Cassen's right. Once their heads are off, they stop moving, Kettle muttered, satisfied. He swung his fist and the remaining skeleton shattered under the sheer force of motion. You wretch! The Lick reeled in disbelief. He could not believe a barbarian with no apparent magical abilities could take down his minions so effortlessly. Kettle gave him a disappointed look. Just skeletons. I expected more from a Lick, maybe a death knight or other undead monsters. You insolent! The Lick bristled with rage, raising his staff. The glowing artifact in his hand flared to life. Arise! Clatter. The fallen bones on the ground stirred once more, assembling themselves not into ordinary skeletons, but into a warrior clad in bone-crafted armor and wielding a shield and a sword. It was the Skeleton Knights, a rare undead monster capable of challenging intermediate fighters. Kill him, the Lick shouted. The Skeleton Knight charged. Kettle tilted his head, his expression one of curiosity. Armor and shield made of bones. They look quite sturdy, Kettle mused. I wonder how sturdy. He swung his fist. Crack. The shield shattered under the impact, the armor crumbled, and half of the Skeleton Knight's upper body was blown away in an instant. Yet, the creature didn't fall. Even with only half a torso, it continued its relentless attack. Oh, it's tougher than the last one, Kettle said, mildly impressed. He grabbed the Skeleton Knight's arm and snapped it clean off, reducing it to bone dust. Then, with a kick, he sent the monster sprawling, its lower body falling apart. The remaining upper half crawled toward him, jaw clacking furiously as it tried to attack. Such loyalty to your master's command. That's admirable, Kettle remarked with a nod. He raised his foot and brought it down with a sickening crunch. The Skeleton Knight's skull was crushed to powder. It's tougher, but not by much, Kettle said cheerfully, turning his gaze back to the Lick. Is that all you've got? I wouldn't mind seeing something more impressive. What are you? The Lick's voice trembled as it spoke. He couldn't sense any mana from Kettle. A barbarian like him should not possess such strength unless aided by a powerful artifact. And yet, His minions had fallen purely to brute force. Did he really defeat the skeleton knight with physical strength alone? The Lick, who had lived for centuries, found himself at a loss. You are extraordinary, the Lick finally admitted, his eyes blazing brighter as he rose from his throne. Very well, I shall face you myself. Consider it an honor. Darkness erupted from the Lick's staff, engulfing the chamber and turning it into a shadowy void. The walls were swallowed in an impenetrable gloom, creating an oppressive atmosphere. Oh, Kettle shivered, not in fear but in awe. It was like a scene straight out of a movie. Are you afraid? The Lick asked. Misinterpreting Kettle's reaction, he let out a satisfied laugh. Yes, fear me, barbarian. You dared trespass in my sanctuary. Now you shall pay the price for your insolence. I mean, I only came because the orbs summoned me. Aren't you the one who scattered them? The Lick didn't have a counter-argument for that. Everyone who had entered this place had been drawn by his enchanted orbs. This barbarian was no exception. Silence, barbarian, the Lick bellowed, his voice echoing in the darkness. Clearly flustered, he tried to cover his earlier lapse. Rising to his full height, he waved his staff dramatically. I am the great and mighty mage who once laid waste to 5 kingdoms and stood against legendary heroes. I am Cardo's Brannier as Keja's. You shall become the cornerstone of my resurrection, wretched barbarian. Cardo's raised his staff, and from the cube at its tip, black flames erupted, swirling hypnotically in a mesmerizing display. The flames danced, ensnaring the viewer's gaze, casting an irresistible spell of enchantment. Kettle stared blankly at the flickering fire as the magic began to consume him. It was a spell designed to dominate emotions, pulling forth negative feelings, which in turn bred even darker ones. The cascading despair would eventually drown the victim's mind, leaving them paralyzed and lost in madness. This spell was Cardo's original creation, exceptionally powerful despite its low mana cost. As he observed Kettle's vacant expression, the Lick felt certain his magic had succeeded. A mere barbarian incapable of wielding the mist, utterly powerless before my great magic, Cardo's mused, a satisfied grin spreading across his skeletal face. He tapped his jawbone twice with a finger. Now, what shall I do with you? Ordinarily, he would have used Kettle as raw material to fuel his mana reserves. But something about this barbarian was different. He doesn't appear to be wearing any artifact, Cardo's thought. Initially, he had assumed otherwise, but now he was sure. If Kettle had been using an artifact of such power, it would have radiated a detectable energy signature. This meant only one thing. Kettle had defeated the skeleton knight with nothing but sheer physical strength, and he had done so with a single blow. It was incomprehensible for Cardo's. As he pondered the implications, a thought struck him. Could he be a vessel for heroism? In this world, there existed beings known as heroes, exceptional individuals born with unparalleled strength and abilities. Their talents and powers defied explanation, placing them beyond the comprehension of ordinary people. Heroes were forces of nature, beings that challenged the limits of understanding. Cardo's knew firsthand of their unbelievable power. In his past, during his reign of terror, he had faced a hero. Despite all his preparations, he had been soundly defeated without mounting a proper defense. People called those, with the potential, to become heroes vessels of heroism. He might be one such vessel. No, he has to be, the Lick thought. Otherwise, how could he have destroyed the skeleton knight with mere physical prowess, without even a hint of mistraining? That's impossible. Very well, I will take him back and study him, Cardo said. He snapped his fingers. Fragments of bone scattered around the room stirred to life, rising and advancing toward Kettle. With his emotions completely dominated, Cardo's new Kettle would remain immobile, unable to resist. However, just as the skeletal pieces came within reach of Kettle, something happened. Crunch. The bones disintegrated into dust. Startled, Cardo's froze. What? Kettle nonchalantly brushed the powdered bones off his hands, as if nothing had happened. How is this possible? Cardo's thought. The spell should have completely subdued his emotions. However, Kettle looked at him with an expression of sheer disappointment. His voice carried the tone of someone utterly unimpressed, as if Cardos's magic didn't work at all. "So all that show was just to send skeletons after me again. That's boring," Kettle said. "You insolent fool!" Furious, Cardos swung his staff wildly, unleashing the emotional manipulation spell once more. The dark magic surged toward Kettle like a tidal wave. "You're definitely doing something," Kettle said, tilting his head, "but I just don't quite get it." Kettle's calm and utterly indifferent attitude left Cardos speechless. The Lick's mind reeled. How could this barbarian remain so unaffected? Humans were beings driven by emotion. Even a saint could not completely suppress the negative feelings that lurked in the depths of their heart. No matter how superhumanly strong one could be, if struck directly by Cardos's magic, they would waver. The only way to resist was to shield one's mind with an impenetrable barrier created by mist. In other words, a barbarian who lacked an understanding of the mist would be utterly defenseless, swallowed whole by the spell. Yet Kettle remained unchanged. He only stared at Cardos with a puzzled expression. This can't be happening, Cardos thought. Of course, Cardos wasn't at his full strength. After all, he had been defeated by a hero and revived as a Lick, with his skills diminished to less than a quarter of his prime. His mana, too, depended heavily on artifacts. Even so, it should have been effortless to dominate the barbarian who couldn't wield the mist. A distorted cry of frustration escaped Cardos. "Arg!" Magic flared once more. An unseen torrent of mana surged into Kettle's mind, tearing through it with brutal force. It was a spell so potent that even an enlightened master would have succumbed, their mind breaking and their spirit drowning in despair. However, Kettle simply stood there, staring blankly at Cardos. "What are you doing?" he asked. Only then did Kettle realize that Cardos was not merely flailing his staff, but casting some kind of spell on him. Yet it didn't resonate with him. There was no sensation, no tangible effect. To Kettle, it merely looked like Cardos was waving his staff around aimlessly. Disappointment slowly crept across his face. A more straightforward spell would be nice, something like Fireball or Magic Missile. "Can't you use those?" Kettle asked. What?" Cardos stammered in shock. "Fireball, Magic Missile." Cardos seethed with unbearable humiliation. "How dare you, comparing my magic to such lowly spells?" he cried. Cardos devoted his life to developing his own magic, a craft that focused on manipulating emotions. The structure of his spells was a masterpiece, one that only he could wield at its peak. And yet, here was someone comparing his work to Magic Missile, a spell even a mere intermediate mage could cast. Shaking with indignation and disgrace, he raised his staff to cast another spell. "I know you're doing something," Kettle remarked, "but I can't tell exactly what." The result was the same as before, nothing. Cardos, now beyond disbelief, let out a hollow laugh. Even the hero who had defeated him in the past had prepared countermeasures specifically for his magic. After all, a spell that could rattle one's emotions was terrifying in its own right. However, this barbarian was different. The magic simply didn't work. Never before had the Lick encountered such an opponent. The blue flames in Cardos's eyes dimmed. Even so, he was still a mage, one who had reached the pinnacle of magic through his unparalleled abilities. He forced himself to analyze the situation calmly. Nothing's working, Cardos thought. The barbarian was undeniably incapable of wielding the mist. That much was certain. A mage's eyes could not be deceived. Yet, his magic, which affected emotions, had no impact on this man. Cardos' mind raced, and he quickly came up with a conclusion. "I see now," Cardos murmured, his jaw clattering. "You came here knowing exactly who I am." "Huh? Yes, that's it. Ha ha ha. The Empire fears me that much, huh? I must admit, I'm impressed by how well they can gather information. You found my location so swiftly," the Lick bellowed with laughter. "But it won't matter. I will resurrect once more, shattering your blades and reclaiming my dominion over the world." "What are you talking about?" Kettle tilted his head. Cardos seemed lost in his own delusions, talking to himself and laughing widely. The Lick's jaw opened wide, and his demeanor changed. He no longer underestimated his opponent. This barbarian, he concluded, was an assassin sent by the Empire to destroy him. Though the barbarian had concealed himself well, the Empire's vast and intricate intelligence network clearly left no room for escape. It was futile to avoid detection. Now that he thought about it, Cardos recalled rumors about the Empire's human farms, places where they raised extraordinary individuals. The barbarian had to have been one of them, bred solely to kill him, a human weapon sharpened to perfection for a singular purpose. How potable you are, barbarian. A pawn raised by humans, wielded like a weapon. It's laughable. If you strike me down, your very purpose will vanish. In a way, we are comrades, you and I, Cardos shouted. I told you that's not it, Kettle interjected, shaking his head. Regardless, I am Cardos Brannier as Kija's. The Lick brandished his staff with fervor. I will kill you and overturn the Empire. The creatures of this world don't really communicate well, Kettle muttered to himself, drawing his own conclusions after mulling over the situation. The elves had been poor conversationalists, and the Lick wasn't any better. But the Empire, huh? Cardos seemed convinced that the Empire had the capability to track him down. In other words, the Empire possessed considerable power. Maybe I should pay it a visit later, Kettle said. His carefree remark, entirely inappropriate for the situation, floated in the air. Come forth, Cardos shouted. He raised his staff high. Mana surged into the cube atop it, coalescing into a tremendous force. Even if this attack delayed his resurrection by a century, it didn't matter. He poured every ounce of mana the cube held into the spell, a quantity of mana so immense it was almost tangible to the physical world. A dense, dark energy began forming at the tip of the staff. At last, something visible caught Kettle's attention. This was the first magic he could actually see. The Lick swung his staff violently toward Kettle. Gather, O torrential tide, become form without substance, a wave that engulfs the world and plunges the unseen into chaos. The dark, dense energy surged forward, transforming into a massive wave that filled the room, churning furiously. Though the wave had a discernible form, it was not made of any physical substance. It left the material world untouched, its effects influencing only intangible emotions. Ooh! Kettle let out an exclamation of admiration. The swirling, dark torrent seemed ready to consume the world itself. It was a truly spectacular sight. So this is real magic, Kettle thought. He stared at the phenomenon in awe, completely transfixed. The black torrent swallowed him whole. Ha 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 ha! Cardos burst into mad laughter. Victory is mine. The barbarian had clearly been altered to resist mental interference, likely due to experiments done by the Empire. But in the end, he was still just a barbarian who couldn't wield the mist. By overwhelming Kettle with sheer mana, the Lick had crushed his mind and broken him completely. Cardos was confident in his victory. Soon, Kettle would collapse under the weight of his attack. Huff, huff, Cardos panted. The blue flames in his eye sockets flickered weakly, as though they might go out. This spell was far beyond his current capabilities. He had expended all the mana he had, except for what was needed to animate his skeletal body. Still, he had shattered the Empire's weapon and outmaneuvered their schemes. Cardos chuckled dryly as the torrent of darkness began to dissipate. But then, his non-existent pupils widened in shock. Kettle stood there, utterly unchanged, looking exactly as he had before. Impressive, Kettle said, his voice filled with genuine admiration. But is that all? It had been a spectacular sight, but he had felt no effects whatsoever. His words sent a chill of fear through Cardos. It didn't work, Carthos thought. He let out a guttural scream as Kettle hefted his axe. What are you? Cartos's skeletal body crumbled to the ground, but his soul surged toward Kettle in a desperate bid to take over the barbarian's body. This was an incredibly dangerous move. Cartos's soul would need to perfectly harmonize with the host body, and if it failed, He would be forced to use that body for the rest of his existence, unable to revert to his Lick form. However, he had no choice. This was his last resort. The translucent soul entered Kettle. To Cardos's surprise, there was no resistance. The soul settled into the barbarian's flesh. "Your body is mine." The Lick's voice echoed as his soul raced through Kettle's mind, attempting to devour his emotions and claim the body as his own. However, as Cardos delved deeper, he realized something was wrong. What is this? It was a sight unlike anything he had ever encountered. The very act of perceiving this place was enough to corrupt his mind and shatter his sanity. This isn't the Empire's doing, Cardos thought. Even the Empire couldn't create such a being. For a moment, Cardos's formidable mental strength allowed him to endure. But his strength, the very trait that made him a master of mind control, became his downfall. The more he held on, the more he was forced to comprehend the incomprehensible. That was the Lick's final utterance. His soul dissolved within Kettle's mind, leaving no trace. Kettle blinked. What was that? Before him lay a pile of broken bones. The Lick, after his dramatic display, had simply collapsed on his own. The dark torrent had been impressive, but it ultimately amounted to nothing. I guess the liches in this world aren't very impressive. Kettle had been so excited, thinking a Lick was the final evolution of a mage. He had eagerly anticipated what kind of magic the Lick would use, but in the end, it had been underwhelming. His disappointment was palpable. "A goblin dungeon would have been more entertaining," Kettle murmured. With that, he pulled a notebook from his pocket and began writing. "Lick, I thought they were the ultimate evolution of a mage, but they don't seem all that impressive. When you think about it, the idea of a being reduced to mere bones being extraordinary is strange. Perhaps liches are failed mages who couldn't give up on their dreams of magic." Kettle carefully jotted down what he had seen and felt. This notebook was something he had purchased to record information about the fantasy world he was experiencing. He scribbled down his observations on the Lick and tucked the notebook back into his pocket. "Well, I've cleared the cave, so I should grab my rewards. A dungeon run by a Lick probably won't have anything amazing, but I should take what I can get, right?" he muttered to himself. He began collecting the loot, starting with the Lick staff. Inside the staff, he found an urn that seemed to be a phylactery. So, this is what lets him resurrect, huh? For a moment, Kettle considered smashing it to prevent Cardo's return, but given his unimpressive level of strength, he decided it wasn't worth the effort. He pocketed the phylactery as well. There was something else to collect. This thing was glowing when he cast spells, wasn't it? On top of the staff rested a translucent gray cube. Every time Cardos cast a spell, a peculiar light had emanated from the cube. It seemed as if the cube was aiding his magic. Does this help with casting magic? Kettle thought. Is it a magical artifact? If so, maybe I could use magic with this too. He grinned widely as he grabbed the artifact. After looting, he looked around and discovered a hidden chamber. A single tap of his finger caused the stone wall to crumble into dust. "Huh," Kettle exclaimed. Inside, he saw 9 people standing motionless. "Hello." He called out, but there was no response. They seemed completely dazed, as if their minds had been sealed. "What am I supposed to do with them?" he muttered to himself. It appeared the Lick had used magic to lock their minds. Now that the Lick was gone, they would likely recover in a few hours, but Kettle had no way of knowing that. After pondering for a moment, he decided to head back to Barkin Estate. This Lick is gone anyway. If I explain what had happened, someone will come and take care of them, he thought. Once he returned to the estate, he explained everything. He explained about a Lick named Cardos that was camping out near their estate. His report caused an uproar throughout the estate. Early in the morning, the receptionists at the guild hall had started their day and were working. "Do we really need to start this early?" Rosa murmured in a dazed tone, clearly still half asleep. Mercenaries tended to have late mornings. They usually wandered into the guild hall lazily by midday. Until then, the staff often had little to do. Our guild leader doesn't like seeing us idling around, the other receptionist answered. The guild hall in the neighboring estate is supposedly so relaxed. Why did we have to end up in this one, of all places? While they chatted away about mundane things and prepared for the mercenaries to arrive, the door suddenly swung open. Rosa, startled by the sight, spoke up. Kettle, you're here early today. The jobs haven't all been prepared yet. Compared to other mercenaries, Kettle was already known for arriving earlier than usual, but this time, even he had arrived exceptionally early. Kettle responded briefly. Something came up. Something like that. It's nothing too major. It's about that orb I showed you yesterday. Kettle explained casually about what had happened to him yesterday. He told Rosa about how the orb had called him, and when he followed its call, he found a hidden dungeon. He even told her about the lick inside it. His tone was incredibly nonchalant, as though he were recounting a simple stroll through the neighborhood. Rosa stared blankly for a moment before bursting into laughter. You're quite the joker today. I'm not joking. Come on, there's no way a lick would appear in such a backwater area. A lick was a being so rare that only a handful existed in the entire world, each of them revered or feared, far beyond the stature of kings. That one could appear near this estate was an unthinkable notion. Rosa concluded Kettle was simply joking because of his unusually early visit and played along. So, how did you defeat this lick? They're supposed to be so powerful they could topple kingdoms, Rosa said playfully. It wasn't much. The lick got caught up in his own foolishness and self-destructed. Self-destructed? Yeah, it's all taken care of now. No need to worry. Kettle then pulled out a jar, holding it out for Rosa to see. Oh, and I brought back what seems to be his phylactery. Could you have it appraised? Wait, what? Rosa's eyes widened as Kettle showed her the jar. Oh. She quickly took it from him, examining it closely. Even someone as untrained as Rosa could sense the sinister energy emanating from the jar. Wait a second, are you really not joking? She asked. I've been telling you I'm not joking this entire time, Kettle replied, his expression practically screaming. Why wouldn't you believe me? Rosa fell silent, her mind racing. What is this? What on earth happened? Any trace of sleep was gone from her face, but there was no time for her to sort through her thoughts. Oh, and there were about 9 people inside, Kettle said. Roughly 9. I thought about bringing them back, but their souls seemed shattered, so I left them there for now. I'd recommend sending people from your guild to retrieve them. 9 people? Rosa gasped in horror. Judging from Kettle's story, this wasn't just any dungeon. Those 9 were likely not adventurers or mercenaries, but ordinary citizens. Come to think of it, Rosa thought. She recalled rumors about people disappearing in the estate. People asked the guild to find the missing people, but no successful rescues had ever been reported. If those disappearances were tied to the lick, then this is big news, she thought. And I think the lick's name was Cardos or something. Do you know of him? Kettle asked. What? No, I've never heard of that name, Rosa replied. She wasn't particularly knowledgeable about history or famous figures, so the name Cardos didn't ring any bells. He must have been bluffing, Kettle murmured. The lick had told him that he was capable of destroying kingdoms, but from his experience, Cardos was not powerful enough to destroy anything, let alone a kingdom. Kettle shook his head as he spoke. It's nothing to worry about. It's all over now. Just focus on rescuing those people. Oh, and I brought some other things from the dungeon. Could you handle those as well? It'd be nice to get a reward if possible. Oh, Rosa's head spun. A lick wasn't the kind of creature that should be dismissed so lightly. She steadied herself and began to speak with great effort. Please hold on. I need to call someone. This was beyond her capabilities. She dashed out of the guild hall. Not long after, the guard commander arrived, panting heavily, his face pale with disbelief. What's this about the lick? The guard commander asked. Nice to see you, Kettle said cheerfully, waving. No big deal, it's all handled. What are you talking about? Kettle gave the commander a brief rundown of what happened. When the name of the lick was mentioned, the commander's eyes widened in shock. You mean Cardo's Branier. Oh, yes, I think that was his full name. Do you know him? Of course I do, the commander shouted involuntarily. Cardo's Branier was a mage who wreaked havoc on the world a century ago. He had created magic that manipulated emotions, plunging countless nations into chaos. Trusted retainers turned traitorous, wise kings were driven mad. Until a hero finally rose to defeat him, several kingdoms had fallen under his spell. And now that very being had reappeared into this world as a lick, the commander thought. Is this true? Yeah, but it wasn't a big deal. He got caught up in his own madness and self-destructed, Kettle replied. What on earth are you saying? The commander struggled to process this, his body trembling from sheer disbelief that a mage of Cardo's caliber had self-destructed. Could you explain this in a bit more detail? I just can't wrap my head around it. I already told you everything, Kettle replied, visibly perplexed by the commander's reaction. The commander felt an overwhelming sense of dizziness, but managed to hold himself together. Wait here. I must inform the Lord immediately. You mean Lord Barkan? Isn't that a bit excessive? Kettle asked. It's not excessive at all, the guard commander thought. Suppressing his desire to argue, he ran off toward the Lord's residence. Lord Barkan doubted his ears upon hearing the story. He could not believe that a lick was found near his estate, and not just any lick, but one that had shaken the world a century ago. At first, Lord Barkan laughed, dismissing it as a joke. It was an absurd notion, impossible to comprehend. However, seeing the desperate expression on the guard commander, he realized it wasn't just a joke. He immediately dispatched a search party to confirm the situation. They headed toward the dungeon the barbarian had mentioned. The dungeon, now bereft of its master, was slowly collapsing. Breaking through the maze-like walls as they progressed, the search party eventually found it, a vast chamber decorated with countless bones. In a hidden room within the chamber, they found individuals who had been reported missing, many of whom held significant influence in the estate. It was then that Lord Barkan understood what was going on. Something sinister had been lurking near the estate all along. After rescuing all the survivors, Lord Barkan began assessing the situation. What on earth happened? The thought of a lick existing so close to his estate was a nightmare for him. He clung to a sliver of hope and asked, maybe he was just a simple skeleton mage, or perhaps some kind of illusionary monster. He wondered if the barbarian might have been mistaken. However, the guard commander shook his head. Unfortunately, that seems unlikely. Among the rescued individuals, some have regained their senses. They all reported the same thing. They described a skeletal figure declaring that his name was Cardo's Branier, and that they were all sacrifices for his resurrection. Then, that same skeletal figure swung his staff. That was their last memory. There are no contradictions in their accounts. Furthermore, we have an item to substantiate their claims, the commander said. You mean the phylactery? Yes, my lord. Lord Barkan asked to examine the item, and it was handed over without hesitation. He rubbed his temples. Did you verify it? I've heard that a phylactery reveals its true essence inherently. We couldn't confirm much, the commander admitted. Lacking the necessary knowledge to identify the item precisely, the commander could only rely on his intuition. However, it doesn't seem fake. Even the commander, who wasn't attuned to magic, could sense the ominous power emanating from the phylactery, a faint remnant of its original owner's overwhelming might. Lord Barkan let out a bitter chuckle. This is maddening. This was no minor issue. Even a lesser lick would have been a significant threat. The fact that such a being had secretly established himself near the estate was reason enough for the kingdom to launch an immediate investigation. If it truly was Cardo's Branier, the situation was even direr. Cardo's was a mage who had opposed the Empire, a single individual who had destroyed countless kingdoms and enslaved heroes with his mind-controlling magic. If his identity was confirmed, the Empire itself might intervene. No, they're definitely going to intervene, Lord Barkan thought. Elite forces from the Empire would inevitably arrive at this small estate, and the aftermath of such an event was unfathomable. Lord Barkan's head throbbed. However, he couldn't sit idle. This was not a matter a rural lord could handle alone. Of all times for him to be away, Lord Barkan was thinking about Swordmaster Kine. If he were here, this ordeal would have been much easier to manage. However, Kine, who had been vacationing in the estate for several days, had left just 2 days prior. Lord Barkan let out a sigh of frustration and gave an order: prepare to send word to the kingdom. Secure the phylactery with utmost caution. Yes, my lord, the commander replied with a nod. Lord Barkan gave a faint smile. Well, I suppose we were fortunate. Indeed, had the barbarian not discovered it, this estate would have been the first sacrifice. If Cardos had truly been preparing for his resurrection, this estate would have gone down in history as just another victim of an evil mage's revival. In that sense, Kettle's actions had been monumental. But if he truly defeated the Lick alone, just how strong is he? Lord Barkan murmured. To defeat a being that even heroes had to face collectively, and to do so in mere hours. Lord Barkan already knew Kettle was powerful after witnessing him overpower the Swordmaster Kine, but this was beyond comprehension. Cardos was reportedly defeated by a hero a century ago. He must have been in a weakened state while preparing for his resurrection, the commander speculated. That's likely. Even so, his feat is remarkable. We will have to reward him appropriately, though I'm not sure if this estate can offer enough, Lord Barkan murmured to himself. Late that night, as the world slept, Lord Barkan tried to do the same. He needed to clear his mind and devise a plan. The following morning, he was awakened by the sound of urgent knocking. My lord, my lord. I'm awake. You may enter, Lord Barkan replied irritably as he rose from his bed. A maid entered, her face pale. Seeing her expression, the lord instinctively knew that things had grown more complicated. The Inquisitor of the Sun God, Lady Aquez, has arrived in the estate, the maid said, and Lord Barkan closed his eyes tightly. A woman was seated in the reception, prepared to greet guests. Her hair, shining like silver, cascaded softly over her shoulders, while her crimson eyes sparkled with a striking brilliance. She was a stunningly beautiful woman, dressed simply in the robes of a priestess. Her sacred aura alone seemed enough to make one kneel before her without even realizing it. If there was one flaw, it was her expressionless face, like that of a doll. She seemed devoid of emotion, almost mechanical. Lord Barkan, sitting before her, gulped hard. It is an honor to meet you, Inquisitor. I am Luke Barkan, Lord of the Barkan Estate. The honor is mine. Thank you for graciously welcoming me on such short notice, the woman replied, bowing her head politely. My name is Aquez. Though I am but a humble servant, I bear the duty of judging heretics in the name of the Sun God. Her demeanor was exceedingly polite, yet Lord Barkan could not lower his guard. Inquisitors were those who stood against the enemies of the Church. They were key figures in the Church's hierarchy, wielding enough power to obliterate a small village on their own judgment and authority. And the woman before him was no ordinary inquisitor. She was the Inquisitor of the Sun God. The Sun God's Church was currently the most dominant religious order on the continent, so influential that even the Empire was forced to yield and make concessions to them. An Inquisitor of the Sun God wielded power far surpassing that of a typical noble lord, and Aquez was someone even Lord Barkan had heard of. She was the youngest Inquisitor in history, a prodigy among prodigies, capable of executing heretical judgments single-handedly. She was the one who single-handedly defeated 7 dark mages who had made contracts with demons and halted a massive ritual. Why is she here? Lord Barkan wondered. Why would such a powerful person come to this small estate? His lips grew dry. Depending on her mood, the fate of the estate could change entirely. The Inquisitor of the Sun God, Aquez, slowly parted her crimson lips. There seems to have been some unrest in the estate. Is everything all right? Do you not know what happened? Lord Barkin asked. I visited the church within the estate before coming directly to you, so I am not aware of the details. I see, the Lord replied, observing her expression. Her face remained emotionless, making it difficult to discern her thoughts, but she didn't appear to be lying. After deliberating for a moment, Lord Barkin finally spoke. There was a minor issue at a dungeon. It has been resolved now. Is that so? That is a relief, Aquez said calmly, her expression as indifferent as ever. Her demeanor gave the Lord confidence. She is not here because of the lick, he thought. Thinking back, even Lord Barkin had only learned of the lick the day before. It was unlikely for someone to travel to such a remote estate within a single day. In that case, there had to be another reason for her visit. May I ask what brings you to our humble estate? If she wasn't here because of the lick, there had to be some other purpose. Inquisitors were not known to move without a clear and compelling reason. Lord Barkin's mind raced, trying to grasp what it could be. Aquez remained silent. The weight of her silence made the Lord increasingly uneasy. Could it be related to a divine oracle? Lord Barkin asked. Aquez did not respond, but her silence was as good as confirmation. The Lord felt faint. A divine oracle? Here, he thought, this was no small matter. Depending on the oracle's message, the sun god's forces could descend upon the estate. Why is this happening to me? I'm just a lord of a small estate. His emotions had to have been evident on his face, prompting Aquez to finally speak. I can share the contents of the oracle with you. At the very least, there is no need to worry on that front. Really? The Lord let out a small sigh of relief. There were two types of oracles, those that could not be revealed to anyone outside the faithful, and those that could be shared openly with the world. If it was the latter, there was little risk of major trouble. Aquez continued, Before I share the oracle's contents, may I first confirm what has happened in the estate? Do you believe it could be related? I cannot be certain, she replied. Her words suggested that it was a possibility. Lord Barkin hesitated. He wondered if it would be wise to mention the lick to a servant of the sun god. His deliberation didn't last long. Seeking aid from the church was the better option. He detested the idea of imperial intervention. The Church of the Sun God was powerful enough that even the Empire couldn't ignore them. If the Inquisitor resolved the matter, the Empire would have no grounds to interfere. The Lord, having made his decision, explained the incident. The Inquisitor's previously emotionless eyes widened. A lick? Aquez asked. Yes, and it could possibly be Cardo's Branier's Keja's. What? Are you saying that being was here? I understand that this lick has ties to your church as well, Lord Barkin added. That's correct. Aquez's brow furrowed slightly. Cardo's had a penchant for toying with the devout, corrupting them, and tarnishing the church's honor. Among his victims were not a few of the faithful who worshipped the sun god. He was one of the enemies the church had declared a heretic and relentlessly pursued. Lord Barkin shook his head. This is an extremely troublesome situation. It's far beyond the capabilities of a small rural lord like me to handle. If mishandled, it might even prompt intervention from the Empire. Are you asking for assistance in dealing with this matter? Aquez asked. As expected, she grasped his intent immediately. The Lord quickly continued, Surely, resolving such a matter would bring great honor to the sun god's church. Cardo's was a long-dead, infamous mage who once plunged the world into chaos. If the sun god's church played a role in preventing his resurrection, their reputation would rise even further. That is irrelevant. What matters is faith. That alone is paramount, Aquez said bluntly. Realizing his words were unnecessary, Lord Barkin shut his mouth. After a brief moment of thought, Aquez spoke. Verification is necessary. You mean to confirm if the lick truly is Cardo's? Yes. Please wait a moment. Lord Barkin rang a bell beneath the table. Before long, a trembling maid brought in the phylactery. Aquez's eyes widened as she examined it. The phylactery is intact. Is there a problem? Lord Barkin asked. The phylactery is the core of a lick. It holds their soul. As long as it remains unbroken, the lick can continue to revive. What? Lord Barkin was aghast. Does this mean Cardos hadn't truly perished? However, as Aquaz inspected the phylactery more closely, her expression twisted into a frown. But I can't sense a soul within it. What in the world is going on here? Her face, usually composed, now showed a mix of confusion, as though she were witnessing the impossible. After carefully analyzing the phylactery, she finally arrived at a conclusion. It is as I suspected. Do you mean? This phylactery belongs to Cardos Braniera's Kijas. That accursed being, from what I've heard, a hero defeated him long ago, but it seems he siphoned his soul into this phylactery in an attempt to revive as a lick. Good heavens! Lord Barkin let out a sound of disbelief. This was truly Cardos, the infamous mage, a figure only spoken of in history books, had been right next to his estate. Why would he come to such a remote area? He likely needed time to regain his strength. This is certainly a problem, Aquaz muttered. The idea that a mage thought to be extinguished was scheming a resurrection, as a lick was no trivial matter. A thorough investigation would be necessary. We will handle this matter. The Empire will have no grounds to intervene, Aquaz declared. Ah, thank you, Lord Barkin replied, sighing in relief. He was glad a major concern had been addressed. However, Aquaz's expression remained conflicted. After some thought, she asked, This estate is the homeland of a swordmaster, is it not? Has he been here recently? Yes, he visited us briefly not long ago. I see. If it were him, he could potentially defeat Cardos, she mused. Cardos was a mage who once shook the foundation of kingdoms. His power surpassed even that of a transcendent. A single swordmaster alone would not be enough to face him. However, Cardos had been defeated by a hero in the past. While his soul had been preserved in the phylactery, he likely hadn't been in peak condition when he tried to revive as a lick. In that case, the swordmaster Kine could have been able to handle him. Still, this is, Aquaz muttered. The phylactery was intact. That meant the lick's soul had been utterly destroyed, something even a swordmaster shouldn't have been able to accomplish. Would it be possible for me to meet with Swordmaster Kine? I'm curious to know how this was handled. It wasn't done by Sir Kine. What? Aquaz's eyes widened in surprise. Then who defeated Cardos? A barbarian. What? A stunned voice escaped her lips. For the first time, emotion seeped into Aquaz's mechanical tone. The Lord found her reaction oddly amusing. There's a barbarian in the estate, she asked. Yes, a barbarian arrived here recently and has been staying with us. Is that not a problem? Barbarians were known to revere strength and disregard order or law, often causing untold issues wherever they went. It was only natural for Aquaz to ask this. Lord Barkin nodded. Surprisingly, he is a very reasonable barbarian. Reasonable. That's not a word typically associated with barbarians. True enough, the Lord replied with a wry smile. He thought of how Kettle acted around his estate. He was indeed polite and possessed common sense. Now that he had grown used to Kettle's presence, the Lord could accept it, but in hindsight, it was an extraordinary and unusual notion. This barbarian defeated Cardos. Is that even possible? Aquaz asked. It is possible, the Lord replied confidently. At least there was no doubting that part. Even Sir Kine lost to him. Aquaz's eyes widened further. Which tribe does this barbarian hail from? I don't know. He bears no marks or tattoos indicating his tribe. Though he claimed to be from the White Snowfield, there was no evidence to support his words. What is his name? Aquaz asked. Kettle. Kettle, Aquaz closed her eyes, likely shifting through her knowledge of barbarians. Shortly after, she opened them again. I've never heard of him. There are barbarians capable of defeating Swordmaster Kine, but their names do not match, and they would have no reason to be here. A new powerhouse, it seems. Aquaz realized there was a new powerful individual capable of defeating a Swordmaster and erasing Cardos' soul. Her gaze suddenly sharpened. A chill ran down Lord Barkhan's spine as he asked, "Is there something wrong?" "The barbarian may very well be the reason I am here," she replied. "What?" The Lord was stunned. Aquez continued, "Would it be possible for me to meet this barbarian?" "What did you say?" Lord Barkhan's eyes widened in disbelief. "I wonder what this could be?" Lying on the bed in his lodgings, Kettle stared curiously at the translucent gray cube in his hand. Inside, a strange light shimmered and flickered. It was obvious to anyone that this was no ordinary object. It was likely some kind of magical artifact. When explaining the situation to Lord Barkhan, Kettle had deliberately refrained from mentioning the cube. He figured that if he brought it up, the Lord would likely confiscate it. And his judgment had been correct. An artifact connected to Cardo's was undeniably dangerous. There was a high chance that it would be seized and never returned to him. How does this thing work? Kettle thought. He had noticed that the cube glowed whenever Cardo's used magic. It appeared to function as a magical amplifier or enhancer. If I have this, could I use magic too? The thought sent a thrill through him. For now, he decided to hold on to it. Perhaps he could ask a mage about its use when he encountered one in the future. Well, time to get moving. He rose from the bed with a cheerful grin. The excitement on his face had little to do with the artifact he had acquired. It was for an entirely different reason. After all, today he was finally going to visit a fantasy world church. The day after he had explained everything to the Lord and handed over the phylactery, the guard commander had come to see him. The commander had informed him that an inquisitor of the sun god had arrived in the estate and wished to meet with him. While Kettle had encountered a priestess before, this was his first time meeting an inquisitor. The meeting place was the church, and he had no reason to decline. He accepted the invitation without hesitation. Seeing Kettle walking along with such a light-hearted smile, the guard commander, his face wrought with unease, spoke cautiously. "Remember, you will be meeting the inquisitor of the sun god. Please, I beg you, don't do anything disrespectful. I'm really asking this as a favor." Though his words bordered on groveling, it was understandable from the commander's perspective. If Kettle caused any offense, it could spell disaster for the entire estate. Kettle chuckled heartily. "Don't worry, have I ever been rude to anyone?" "Well, no, you haven't." Even when dealing with the priestess who worshipped the god of lies and deception, Kettle had maintained perfect decorum. Since there had been no problem clearing the dungeon, meeting the inquisitor of the sun god should be no different. This barbarian was certainly not like the others of his kind. The commander remained silent as they walked. They soon arrived at their destination, the sun god's church, located in a quiet corner of the estate. "This is the place," the commander said. "I see," Kettle exclaimed in wonder. In this world, gods existed. They granted power directly and at times even descended upon the mortal realm. The church was a place where those who served such deities gathered. Kettle wondered what a fantasy world church would be like. He had known about the sun god's church in the estate for some time. The moment he had learned of it, he had wanted to visit. However, he hadn't been able to. The reason was simple. Only worshippers of the sun god were allowed to enter the church. Technically, non-worshippers could enter with special permission, but the nuns had vehemently opposed allowing a barbarian inside. However, this time, Aquez herself had requested to meet Kettle at the church. Kettle couldn't hide his delight. "This is more than enough reward," he said with a grin. "Please, I beg you, behave yourself," the commander pleaded again. The door opened slowly, and several women greeted him. Welcome, Mr. Kettle," one of the nuns stammered, her voice trembling. They were visibly nervous. Kettle felt a small pang of emotion. Although Hayes, a priestess Kettle had encountered before, also served a god, her attire had been practical and comfortable for travel. These nuns, however, wore traditional, elegant habits exuding refinement and grace. For some reason, Kettle found this rather pleasant. A wide grin spread across his face. "Thank you for the warm welcome." At his smile, One of the nuns wavered, nearly collapsing. Another nun quickly caught her before she fell. "Are you okay?" Kettle asked, stepping forward, only for the nun to flinch and move away as though startled. "I'm fine. Please, there is no need to help me," she exclaimed, retreating hastily. Her reaction was a clear rejection, and Kettle felt a small sting of hurt in his heart. The other nuns, visibly uneasy, began to retreat as well, trembling as they moved away. "Lady Aquaz is waiting for you inside. Please, go on ahead," one of them said before the group quickly fled. Now alone, Kettle rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Am I not supposed to smile? It seemed that every time he smiled, things got worse, but going expressionless could make him look even scarier. Though saddened by the nuns' reactions, Kettle brushed it off. He had endured far worse and wasn't going to let this bother him. Let's just enjoy the moment, he thought, stepping inside the church. Rows of pews lined the space, facing a table at the front where the priest presumably gave sermons. The design wasn't so different from the churches on Earth. The only noticeable difference was the lack of stained glass. It seemed glass wasn't yet common in this world. Behind the table stood a statue, a depiction of a robust man holding a spear raised high into the sky, and a round shield, radiating an aura of majesty and authority. Is this their god, the sun god? He thought. He could not believe he was in front of a statue of an actual god, one who granted power and delivered divine revelations. He started at the statue, a mix of thoughts and emotions stirring within him. After a moment of quiet reflection, he knelt down and clasped his hands together. He started praying. Aquaz, who had been silently observing him, was startled. The reverence in Kettle's posture was unmistakable. He exuded a sense of profound devotion that rivaled that of the most devout priests. For a moment, Aquaz found herself captivated, unable to look away. His posture was so sincere that she hesitated to interrupt him. But just as she was debating what to do, Kettle stood and, as though he had been aware of her presence all along, turned to face her. Their eyes met, his hair ashen gray, hers shimmering with silver. "You must be Aquaz," he said. "It is an honor to meet you," Aquaz replied, regaining her composure and offering a polite bow. "I am Aquaz, Inquisitor of the Sun God." "And I am Kettle, a barbarian. It's a pleasure to meet you," he said with a wide grin. Aquaz led Kettle to the church's reception room. They sat facing each other, silently observing each other's demeanor. Aquaz was a beautiful woman, but Kettle couldn't shake the thought that her hands had to be stained with the blood of many. It gave him a peculiar feeling. Inquisitors existed in his own world as well, or, more precisely, they used to exist. In the distant past, when religion wielded extraordinary power, there were those tasked with judging heresy. Though their traces had faded in the modern world, history books described them as real and significant figures. Unlike mages or swordmasters, Aquaz was fascinating in a different way. It felt as though he were sitting face to face with a piece of living history. On her part, Aquaz's mind was equally unsettled. Her initial plan had been to press Kettle for answers, to interrogate him and forcibly extract the truth. However, witnessing his prayer filled with sincere reverence earlier had changed her mind. In the end, she couldn't help but ask, "Do you believe in our God?" "No, I don't believe in any particular God," Kettle answered. The response was expected, so she wasn't surprised. However, it left her with a question. "Then why did you offer a prayer to our God?" "I may not believe in your God, but I was invited into your church, was I not?" Kettle replied calmly. Even if the invitation wasn't an entirely welcoming one, it was still an invitation. And so, it's only proper to show respect. Of course, as a non-believer, I cannot offer the reverence of the heart. That would be the height of disrespect to your God. But at the very least, I can offer respect with my conduct, if not my faith. Even if he didn't believe, he could act with decorum and follow the appropriate gestures of respect. Aquaz's expression went blank, caught off guard by his reasoning. Seeing her silent, Kettle asked hesitantly, "Was that disrespectful? If so, I apologize." "No, not at all." Aquez hurriedly shook her head. You're absolutely correct. Even without faith, one can still offer respect in form. You've expressed it perfectly. Aquez's face showed a trace of admiration. There's nothing more disrespectful than the insincerity of a non-believer's heart. But at the very least, one can show respect of the body, she thought. Kettle's words resonated with her. In truth, Aquez was exhausted. As an inquisitor, she constantly dealt with those who rejected or mocked her faith. They hurled insults at her and her god, and while she made sure they paid the appropriate price, the endless encounters had taken a toll on her. Yet now, a barbarian, who should have been a symbol of unbelief, was speaking such inspiring words. Her impression of the man in front of her improved significantly. The coldness in her eyes softened, replaced with a faint warmth. Seemingly struck by a sudden thought, Kettle's face took on an awkward expression. Should I be burned at the stake for saying this? Now that I think about it, speaking words of unbelief in front of a devout follower must be incredibly rude. What? No, not at all. As long as you don't directly insult our God, simply being a non-believer isn't an offense, Aquez said, quickly shaking her head again. In ancient times, there were cases where disbelief alone was enough to warrant punishment, but in the current era, such practices would cause serious problems. Inquisitors now only dealt with those who directly insulted their god or those corrupted by evil. I see. That's a relief, Kettle said with a small laugh. It seemed this wasn't as harsh an era as the days of religious wars back on Earth. Now then, let's get to the main topic. You must have had a reason to summon me here, Kettle said, smiling quietly. His smile was predatory, like that of a beast. It's about the recent dungeon, isn't it? Yes, Aquez replied. He's sharper than he lets on, she thought. This man was far removed from the stereotypical barbarian. Aquez continued. The one you claim to have defeated, Cardos, was a former mage who committed great atrocities against the world a century ago. Many transcendents sought to bring him down, but none succeeded. In the end, it had taken a hero to finally defeat him. Kettle leaned back in his chair. Even so, it doesn't mean much to me. He had heard plenty of the same talk the day before. To him, Cardos was nothing more than a lick who had floundered on his own and self-destructed. You don't believe me, and I can only trust my own eyes. We're at an impasse, Kettle said. That's true, Aquez admitted. But our god possesses the power to resolve such an impasse. Oh, Kettle's curiosity was piqued. By invoking the name of the god I serve, and with you pledging your honor, we can ensure that only the truth is spoken here. Shall we apply that rule? A rule implies compulsion, doesn't it? Kettle said with a grin, baring his teeth. Is this divine power? Yes, the sun god will directly oversee our conversation. If it makes you uncomfortable, you are free to decline, Aquez explained, narrowing her eyes slightly. She didn't expect him to accept. Even if he was different from a typical barbarian, he was still a non-believer. No one would willingly expose themselves to the gaze of a god they did not worship. Her goal was to understand Kettle. She assumed that his refusal would be the starting point to learn more about him, giving her insights into his character and motivations. But to her surprise, Kettle burst into a bright smile. Refuse, why would I? What? Aquez was genuinely surprised. For Kettle, this was an opportunity to experience the sun god's divine authority firsthand. He was visibly excited, almost giddy. The lick had been a disappointment, but a god was bound to be different. He was certain the sun god's power would leave him in awe. Are you certain about this? Aquez asked, startled. Of course. Let's begin immediately, Kettle exclaimed enthusiastically. It was Aquez who found herself unsettled. To anyone not devoted to the sun god, being directly observed by him should have been daunting. However, Kettle's visible excitement, as though the act of witnessing divine power was his main goal, left her utterly baffled. What's going on? She thought. It felt as if the roles had reversed. Instead of Aquez testing Kettle by invoking divine power, it seemed as though Kettle was testing the power of the sun god. Aren't you uncomfortable? Aquez asked. What do you mean? Kettle replied. Our God will be watching you. Why would that be uncomfortable? Kettle asked with a curious tone. I have nothing to hide, I have no shame. After all, he hadn't told a single lie. Even if bound by divine rules, it posed no disadvantage to him. To put it simply, it's just like a lie detector, isn't it? Kettle thought. There was no need to overthink it. On the contrary, it was intriguing for him. Unlike the lie detectors of the real world where he was from, this one was flawless, free from any margin of error. It was nothing short of fascinating. However, Aquez felt differently. In this world, the concept of being watched by a god held profound significance. It meant being exposed entirely to a towering, transcendent being, laying bare every hidden corner of oneself. It was akin to a confessional. Those with even a sliver of shame in their lives would instinctively recoil at the idea. However, the barbarian before her boldly claimed otherwise. He said he was unashamed. He said he had no regrets, no guilt. Kettle's declaration meant that he believed he had lived a life so upright that even if he were to stand before the divine, he would have no cause for shame. Aquez wondered how many could make such a claim. Even the most devout believers often trembled under the gaze of the gods. Aquez was overwhelmed with awe. She began to question whether the being standing before her was truly a barbarian. His composure seemed almost saintly. You are remarkable, she said. Of course, Kettle hadn't thought that deeply about it. To him, the god's gaze was merely equivalent to a lie detector. He found Aquez's reverent gaze puzzling. Then, shall we begin? She closed her eyes, clasping her hands together in prayer. My God, you who dwell in the highest of places, the great being who observes the radiant sun, I beseech you, with your divine gaze, expose the impurities that lie hidden here. It was a prayer, a plea for divine intervention. In response to the believer's invocation, the power of the god was set into motion. A resonating hum filled the air. A pillar of light descended. Though the church's ceiling was supposed to block the heavens, the blinding light tore through, as though nothing could hinder its descent. It struck with violent force, enveloping them. Startled by the sudden pillar of divine light, the people in the estate cried out. Some even knelt, overwhelmed by its sanctity. Oh, wow, Kettle was moved. It felt as if the god himself had descended. The pillar of light enveloped him entirely. Looking beyond the pillar, he saw something. There was a presence on the other side. The barbarian and the otherworldly being sensed each other and met. Oh, Kettle chuckled softly. The presence is immense. No, the word immense is not doing it justice. This was something beyond the confines of human language, beyond human comprehension. The presence on the other side gazed at Kettle, and he felt its emotions through its gaze. He could distinctly feel the presence was confused and bewildered. Aquez, unaware of this silent exchange of gazes, simply stared at Kettle. No signs of deception, she thought. Her eyes softened, and she slowly began to speak. Then let us proceed. Within this pillar, no lies can be spoken. I understand, Kettle replied. Aquez began questioning Kettle about the process of clearing the dungeon. Kettle answered, as he had before, without any variation. As he had claimed, he had never spoken a lie. Aquez pieced together the puzzle in her mind. Cardos had been in the midst of his resurrection, so he didn't possess his full power. This barbarian was extraordinarily strong. Cardos couldn't have been an easy opponent even in that weakened state. It seemed that Cardos had overexerted himself to defeat the barbarian, only to succumb to his own overwhelming mana in the end. How fortunate, Aquez thought. Had Cardos been able to use his magic properly, this barbarian would not have been standing here now. His magic, capable of dominating emotions, was incredibly powerful. Have your doubts been resolved? Kettle asked. Yes, thank you. Please forgive my impudence. It's fine. I rather enjoyed it, he replied with a grin. Though the matter was concluded, the pillar of light did not dissipate. Aquez continued to gaze at Kettle, who tilted his head curiously. Is it over? He asked. There are a few more things I'd like to confirm. These are personal questions. You are free to refuse to answer. The only thing you cannot do here is lie. Kettle stroked his chin thoughtfully. Then let's make it fair, a trade, so to speak. Excuse me. For every question you ask, I will ask one in return. Fair, isn't it? Oh, yes, I will answer anything I'm able to. Aquez agreed without much hesitation. Then my first question, where are you from? From the coldest place in the world. A place untouched by human feet, Kettle said with a shrug. The place you call the White Snowfield. What? Aquez's eyes widened. You're saying you came from there? Kettle nodded. The pillar of light remained unchanged, a testament to his honesty. Then it's my turn. Ah, yes. Kettle began asking about the myths, legends, and historical records surrounding the sun god. Under normal circumstances, Aquez might have found his questions peculiar. He was interrogating her with the meticulousness of someone preparing to join a faith. Yet, she was so absorbed in his words that the thought didn't even cross his mind. She gave him a brief explanation in response to his questions before immediately asking her own. What is there in that place? She was visibly excited. Although she was an inquisitor, she was also a seeker of knowledge. The thrill of uncovering the unknown gave her immense satisfaction. The White Snowfield was a mysterious land shrouded in enigma. And now, standing before her was someone who had come from that very place, potentially holding the answers to those mysteries. Do monsters truly exist there? Are there other barbarians like you as well? She asked. Kettle hesitated, his words trailing off. There was a noticeable discomfort in his face. I'm sorry, but may I refuse to answer? I'd rather not think about that place again. Oh, I see. Though deeply disappointed, Aquez knew she couldn't press him any further. The unease etched on Kettle's expression was unmistakable. She chose her next words carefully. In that case, could you at least confirm one thing, the legend of the Emperor? Long ago, an emperor who had once ruled the world ventured into the White Snowfield. He returned defeated and spoke of horrific monsters dwelling there. Do those beings truly exist? She asked. She was talking about the white serpents that devoured glaciers, white bears that caused earthquakes, and ugly rats that polluted the sea. Kettle nodded solemnly. They exist. I encountered them often. I see. Aquez was overwhelmed. She had found confirmation of the ancient legend. She wanted to ask more, how he survived, how many barbarian tribes existed there, but before she could continue, Kettle spoke first. Then it's my turn to ask a question. Why have you come to this estate? Oh, I had business here. It's a personal matter, Aquez replied vaguely, intending to shift the conversation back to the White Snowfield. However, before she could ask her next question, Kettle interjected. Is this personal matter perhaps to determine if I am an impure being? Aquez's heart stopped cold. The excitement that fueled her moments ago vanished entirely. With great difficulty, she forced her lips to move. What do you mean by that? Was I wrong? I thought it was a logical assumption. Kettle leaned back leisurely against the sofa. You introduced yourself as an inquisitor. While I don't know the details, it's clear you are not an ordinary priestess. And yet, here you are, personally visiting this remote estate. At first, Kettle had thought her objective was Cardo's, but after their conversation, it became clear that wasn't the case. Aquez had shown little interest in Cardo's. In other words, you came here with a purpose unrelated to the lick. And when you prayed earlier, you didn't ask for falsehoods to be revealed, but rather for impurities to be exposed, Kettle said. It was a subtle play on words, but one that entirely changed the meaning of the prayer. And then there's the gaze of the god. While I don't fully understand, it seems to me that having a god directly look upon something isn't a trivial event. Using such a thing merely to detect lies seems excessive. It must have been intended to uncover something deeper. Kettle smiled faintly, then continued. So wasn't your purpose here in summoning me to determine if I am an impure being? Aquez's frozen heart still refused to beat. She wanted to deny it, but the god was watching. In this sacred light, no falsehoods could exist. Eventually, she opened her mouth, her words slow and reluctant. Yes, that's correct. Oh, so I was right. Kettle began to whistle, evidently pleased by his deduction. It had been a guess born of mere curiosity, but the fact that it was correct amused him. He felt nothing more, nothing less. However, for Aquez, it was a completely different story. Her lips felt dry as if all moisture had been drained from them. She had thought she had deftly fooled the barbarian, but the truth was the exact opposite. He had known her intentions from the very beginning. What a foolish mistake, she thought. She had prayed to uncover impurity. She had called upon the gaze of the god just to determine if someone was lying. A moment's thought would have revealed how absurd her actions were. Yet, she had acted without hesitation because he was just a barbarian. She had unconsciously clung to the stereotype that barbarians were simple-minded beings who forgot everything once they were taught something new. Even though Lord Barkan had already warned her that this was no ordinary barbarian, her ingrained preconceptions had blinded her. Now, as regret filled her, a thought surfaced. If this barbarian had known everything, does that mean he was doing everything willingly? Then I'm curious, Kettle said, his tone calm. Was I your objective from the beginning? No, Aquez replied, shaking her head. She could not lie, nor did it make any sense to refuse now. All she could do was try not to offend him further. That wasn't it. A divine oracle was delivered. My purpose was to confirm whether you were the subject of that oracle. As you can see, you're not. The barbarian was not the subject of the oracle. Aquez bowed her head. I apologize. I concealed my intentions and deceived you. Under normal circumstances, Kettle would have had every right to be furious. Barbarians despise deception above all else. It doesn't matter. I had my fun. To her surprise, Kettle only laughed. It wasn't forgiveness. It was simply the truth that Aquez's actions had amused him. In that laughter, there was something transcendent, something beyond the mortal realm. Aquez couldn't help but ask, "Are you truly human?" "I am human," Kettle replied. The pillar of light surrounding them remained unchanged, affirming his words. Then, as a form of atonement, if I may, let me ask one more thing. What was the content of the oracle? Kettle asked. Under normal circumstances, revealing the content of a divine oracle to a barbarian would have been unthinkable. Oracles were to be shared only with those deemed trustworthy. However, she couldn't refuse. She had deceived the barbarian, and now she owed him. Could he have planned this from the beginning? She thought. Did he make me incur a debt so he could learn the oracle's message? Doubts flooded her mind, her thoughts spiraling. But eventually she began to talk. She recited the oracle to Kettle. As he listened, his eyes gleamed with intense curiosity. Aquez leaned back against the sofa, staring blankly at the ceiling. She felt drained. It had been a long time since she had felt this exhausted. Her unshaken mind, which had resisted countless curses, hatred, words of apostasy, and even demonic whispers, had finally reached its limit after less than an hour of conversation with the barbarian. The barbarian from the white snowfield. Even the thought of it made her head spin. She found herself wishing that he had simply been the subject of the divine oracle. "You seem troubled," Lord Barkan remarked, sitting across from her. He was chuckling lightly as he lifted his teacup. He was deeply intimidated by Aquez, the inquisitor of the sun god, a figure of great renown and countless accomplishments. While her individual strength might not rival Swordmaster Kine, she carried the unique status of a devout servant of the divine. Moreover, as an inquisitor, she was a tool of her god, someone who had executed and dealt with countless heretics. To Lord Barkan, Aquez appeared less like a fellow human and more like a transcendent being. However, seeing her react to the barbarian in a way similar to his own gave him a sense of shared humanity. Aquez finally spoke. "Who is he?" "I don't know. He showed up on the estate not long ago and has been living here ever since. He claims to have come from the white snowfield, but there's no evidence to support it." "I've confirmed it. While I couldn't gather detailed information about the white snowfield, I can say with certainty that he is a barbarian from the snowfield." "Are you sure?" The Lord's eyes widened. Though Kettle had said so himself, Lord Barkan hadn't fully believed him. After all, barbarians from the White Snowfield were the stuff of legends. However, now Aquas, a trusted authority, had confirmed it. It meant that the existence of the White Snowfield and its habitant was real. If this becomes known, the world will erupt in chaos, Lord Barkin muttered. The White Snowfield was a land many sought to explore, especially the Emperor, who wished to conquer the world, including the demon realms. If the Emperor were to move on this discovery, the scale of the ensuing chaos would be unimaginable. Just thinking about it gave the Lord a headache. You needn't worry about that. Cardos will be handled by my side, and we plan to keep the matter of the barbarian from reaching the public, Aquas said. That's a relief. Are all the barbarians from the White Snowfield like him? Probably not. That barbarian must be an exception. If they were all like him, they would have left the snowfield and conquered the world by now. Though Lord Barkin spoke as if joking, it was no jest. There were many barbarians in the world, even if they weren't from the White Snowfield. Their strength was formidable. As a group, they ranked among the strongest. While their strength was undeniable, they were also foolish. Or rather, not quite foolish but simple-minded, though the distinction hardly mattered. It was an inherent limitation of their nature. Lord Barkin suddenly recalled something. Now that I think about it, I heard that the king of the barbarians is different from other barbarians. They say he has both strength and intelligence. Oh, you mean the king of all barbarians. I've met him once. He was certainly unlike any other barbarian I've encountered, Aquas replied. Is that so? It would be interesting if Kettle and the king of all barbarians were to meet. I wouldn't say the same, Aquas replied with a wry smile. The relationship between barbarians and the followers of the sun god was far from amicable. To Aquas, the idea of their power growing stronger was no laughing matter. Lord Barkin sipped his tea lightly. Whatever you may be concerned about, from what I've observed, there is nothing to worry about. Kettle is a good person, remarkably so. Kettle handled tasks no one wanted to take on, solving them with a smile. He split the rewards of the unexplored dungeon with his party members without hesitation. Kettle had never once acted in a way that caused harm to others. In fact, he was the most polite and kind person the Lord had ever encountered. Swordmaster Kine once said that as long as you don't provoke a beast that's lying still, there's nothing to worry about, Lord Barkin remarked. If Swordmaster Kine said so, then it must be true, but... Aquas bit her lip. In her eyes, the barbarian was intelligent and rational. He was considerate of others and didn't seem like the type to cause trouble on his own. However, that was only because he had no reason to do so. It was a matter of pure indifference. He had no reason to care, so he was considerate. Even beasts, when full, did not bother hunting prey. But what if an external factor placed restrictions on Kettle's actions? What if something sparked his interest? Aquas thought. She knew that if that were to happen, Kettle would do anything to destroy everything that hindered his way. Barbarians were that kind of being. It seems many changes are on the horizon, Aquas thought. Just thinking about the chaos and ripples Kettle might cause already gave Aquas a headache. By the way, were you able to accomplish what you came here for? Lord Barkin asked, trying to lighten the mood. Aquas nodded. Yes, there were no issues on that front. I'm curious. What was the oracle about that necessitated meeting with Kettle one-on-one? I needed confirmation. Confirmation. I needed to see whether he was a pure human, or something mimicking humanity. What could the oracle possibly be? A brief silence fell. Lord Barkin gulped nervously as Aquas began to speak. His eyes widened in shock at her words. A day later, Kettle visited the Lord's castle. We meet again, Lord Barkin said, waiting in the reception room. Kettle entered with a cheerful grin and extended his hand. How have you been? Well enough, and you? The Lord asked with a faint smile. Kettle chuckled in response. I've been enjoying my days thoroughly, all thanks to you for managing such a fine estate. I'm glad to hear that, the Lord replied, somewhat awkwardly. Kettle sat on the sofa across from him. So, what's the reason for this meeting? Lord Barkin had invited him into his castle, without telling him the details of the meeting. "As the lord of this estate, there's something I need to tell you," he said, bowing his head slightly. "I must express my gratitude. You saved this estate." He was talking about Cardo's. If the Lick had been resurrected as he planned, this small estate would have been reduced to ruins in an instant. The barbarian was nothing short of the estate's savior. "Did I?" Kettle asked, his expression genuinely puzzled. "Aqua's told me as much, but honestly I don't quite understand. Even if my party members had gone to the dungeon, they would have resolved it without issue." "You mean the warrior, the thief, and the priestess of the god of lies and deception?" Lord Barkin asked. "Exactly. They're all exceptional individuals." Lord Barkin fell silent. As far as he knew, those party members were still classified as F-rank mercenaries, solving low-level requests. Shaking his head, the Lord decided it was futile to take the barbarian's words too seriously. "Regardless of that, the fact remains that you saved the estate. As its Lord, I must thank you, and I must apologize." "For what?" "I need to inform you that you defeating Cardo's will not be made public." Lord Barkin's face was tinged with deep unease. Defeating Cardo's was a remarkable achievement. If the news spread, Kettle's name would become known across the entire continent. However, that couldn't be allowed to happen. If word got out, the Emperor himself would take notice. Ultimately, this meant that Kettle would not receive the recognition he deserved. While key figures in the kingdom and the Sun God's church would know of his feat, it would still result in considerable disadvantages for him. "Is that so? As long as my freedom isn't hindered, it doesn't matter much to me," Kettle replied nonchalantly. He had little interest in fame. However, from the Lord's perspective, it was as though he had deprived Kettle of something he was entitled to, and so felt obligated to compensate him appropriately. "It might not be much of an apology, but you saved the estate. I must reward you for that." Lord Barkin took out an item from his belongings, a luxurious leather pouch. "This is for you." "A leather pouch?" "It's no ordinary leather pouch. See for yourself." "Oh," Kettle's expression lit up with curiosity as he took the pouch. The material was clearly of high quality, and upon closer inspection, it was adorned with intricate, mysterious patterns. "Is this what I think it is?" "Check inside," Lord Barkin said with a grin. Kettle opened the pouch, and what he saw exceeded his expectations. The pouch itself wasn't very large, just big enough to hold a few gold or silver coins. However, its interior was incredibly spacious. Even with a cursory glance, Kettle could tell it was large enough to hold the equivalent of an entire room. He looked at Lord Barkin, excited. "This is incredible." "It's an artifact, a fairly high-grade one at that. Consider it a reward for saving the estate and for keeping certain matters confidential. I hope you find it satisfactory." "Satisfactory? It's perfect!" Kettle exclaimed. He had just received an artifact, a genuine magical item. It was his first time seeing one in person. The Lord smiled. "It doesn't have any particularly extravagant effects. It's just a space expansion artifact, nothing more." "That's more than enough." Kettle recalled the hassle of carrying all his supplies during his recent expedition into the unexplored dungeon. With this pouch, such inconveniences would no longer be an issue. The space inside is roughly equivalent to the size of this reception room. Items larger than the pouch's opening will still fit inside, Lord Barkin explained. "Really?" To test it, Kettle picked up his axe. The weapon was too large to fit into the pouch under normal circumstances. Yet, as soon as he placed the axe near the opening, it seemed to be sucked inside effortlessly. Kettle's eyes grew even wider. "Ooh." To retrieve an item, simply reach in and think of the object you want. Kettle reached into the pouch, picturing his axe. Instantly, the weapon was drawn into his hand, seemingly pulled out by an invisible force. "Ooh," Kettle was ecstatic. "It's a genuine artifact, a staple of fantasy tales, and a pouch-shaped artifact no less." It was the kind of item protagonists always acquired first in such stories. To have it in his hands felt almost unreal. The sheer joy made his mind spin. Seeing Kettle's elation, Lord Barkin laughed. Even though it was something he had to give as compensation, seeing Kettle so genuinely pleased made him feel good. "I went to great lengths to acquire that. I'm glad you like it," Lord Barkin said. "It's perfect." Both its practicality and personal satisfaction were unparalleled for Kettle. "But I'm curious, how did you acquire such an item? It doesn't seem like the kind of thing you'd come by easily. Did you buy it from the Mage Tower or somewhere similar?" "No, not from them," the Lord replied. "I got it from one of the wandering merchants." "Wandering merchants?" Kettle asked. "Have you never heard of them? They appear out of nowhere, selling all sorts of peculiar items. I purchased this from them." "They're not human, are they?" "Who knows? They always wear strange ornaments, so their true identity is impossible to discern. They ask for payment, and if you pay, they give you the item. That's all I know." "Interesting." Kettle's eyes gleamed with intrigue. "If you travel enough, you're bound to encounter them someday. They appear suddenly and unpredictably, so it's all up to chance." "That sounds exciting," Kettle said with a wide grin. After asking a few more questions about the wandering merchants, Kettle left the castle. Alone in the reception room, Lord Barkin leaned back into the sofa and pressed a hand to his forehead. "At least this issue is resolved," he muttered. He was relieved that Kettle had accepted the artifact without complaint. It was an exceptionally rare item. The goods sold by wandering merchants were notoriously scarce, and their quality was often unmatched. This particular artifact had been a meaningful gift from Swordmaster Kyne when Lord Barkin became a lord. However, as valuable as the artifact was, Kettle was a man driven by curiosity. The possibility that he might refuse had loomed large, but fortunately, the worst-case scenario had been avoided. Still, the matter was far from over. A much greater problem remained. "The Oracle," the Lord murmured with a bitter smile. "What on earth is happening in this remote estate?" Kyne had said something was stirring in the world. He had come to the estate to warn Lord Barkin. "I just wish Kyne had been a bit more specific," the Lord thought, quietly grumbling in his heart. Aquaz's words about the divine oracle echoed in his mind. "Evil will descend," she had said. "The great evil, it will come here and spread across the world." The Barkin estate consisted of numerous villages spread around the city. Traveling merchants roamed among these villages, selling goods that were in short supply. Like most regions, these villages formed an interwoven network, maintaining regular communication with one another. Then one day, contact with one of the villages suddenly ceased. At first, no one found it odd. There were times when merchants failed to arrive or, by chance, no one ventured out of the village, causing a temporary lack of communication. However, several days passed, and the village still did not send word. Concerned, people from a nearby village went to investigate, but they never returned. Those who went looking for them also failed to come back. Alarmed, they notified the Lord. After hearing the situation, the Lord sent a tax collector to confirm what was happening. The tax collector did not return either. Realizing the severity of the matter, the Lord assembled a squad of 10 fully armed guards and dispatched them. Sometimes a village refused to pay taxes and either fled or barricaded themselves in, so he wanted to check if that was the case. Ordinary farmers stood no chance against such a well-armed force. However, the guards did not return either. Only then did the Lord realize that something dire was happening. Kettle arrived at the Guildhall early in the morning, just as he always did, and asked, "What kind of requests do you have for me today?" However, instead of handing him the request board, Rosa spoke in a calm voice. "Today, we have an emergency request. It's from the Lord himself." A look of intrigue flickered across Kettle's face. "What is it about?" "It's to investigate a village that has stopped sending word." Rosa explained that contact with a particular village had been severed a few days ago, and Lord Barkin had asked them to find out why. "It's essentially a simple dispatch request, but the payment is unusually high." "Interesting," Kettle grinned in a peculiar way, then nodded. "Let's accept it." Rosa, as though expecting that response, gave a small smile. Kettle then headed toward the departure point. There, he was greeted with a familiar face. He recognized her right away and walked up with a delighted expression. "Hayes, you came as well." "Ah, Kettle, hello," she replied. Hayes, the priestess who served Kaloja, the god of lies and deception, lowered her head politely. "Did you accept this request too?" Kettle asked. "Of course I did. I could hardly pass up such an intriguing job." Hayes smiled. She knew from experience that this barbarian would never ignore a request that stirred his curiosity. Kettle glanced around Hayes, as though noticing something. "Are you alone? Where are the other party members?" "They must have heard about the request, so I assume they turned it down. We all have a bit of spending money now, thanks to you. They're probably loafing around at some tavern." They had cleared an unexplored dungeon together. Even though the other party member only received 10% of the total reward, it was still enough money that they could afford to take it easy for quite a while. Kettle tilted his head. "Then why are you here? Don't you have enough to last you a while?" "I have to send money back to my church, so I can't spend frivolously like they do." As a follower of the Church of Kaloja, a deity viewed with distrust, she served a faith that struggled financially. Hayes always sent all her income to the church, keeping only enough for bare necessities. "That must be rough. Hang in there," Kettle said. "Thank you. Still, I managed to send them a large sum thanks to you. I'm really grateful." "No need to thank me. We're in the same party, aren't we?" Kettle replied with a grin. Hayes no longer found his smile intimidating. "How have you been, Kettle?" "I've been the same as always. I've just been completing smaller requests here and there." "I see," Hayes said. She had no idea that Kettle had already defeated Cardos. Since Aquez and the Lord had kept it a secret, hardly anyone in the estate knew Cardos had ever existed. Hayes simply nodded at Kettle's words. Kettle tapped the leather pouch on his belt. "I received this as part of a reward, too." Hayes let out a small, confused laugh. "That looks high quality. It must have cost a lot." She never imagined that the leather pouch was actually an artifact. Artifacts were extremely rare, usually obtainable only in the capital city, and even then reserved for those of noble status. So she just thought that the pouch was an ordinary, yet expensive, pouch. "Congratulations," Hayes said with a smile. "Do you like it?" "I'm quite satisfied. Thank you," Kettle answered, flashing a grin. He looked genuinely happy to receive her congratulations. Hayes chuckled softly. She thought this barbarian had a childlike quality to him. He reacted enthusiastically to even small things, and he knew how to show pure joy. At first, she had been terrified of him, but she had grown accustomed to his nature and even found it charming. They passed some time chatting idly. Soon, other mercenaries who had accepted the request began to gather. Kettle counted their numbers and stroked his chin. "There aren't as many as I expected." It was a simple mission with a big reward, so he had assumed more people would show up. In total, however, they hadn't even reached 10. Hayes gave an awkward smile. "To be honest, this request is a bit risky." "Really?" The request itself seemed pretty straightforward. "It is straightforward, but the reward is too generous." All they had to do was travel to the village. Anyone could do that. Yet the pay was far higher than the job warranted, which suggested the situation might be more than it seemed. "There's also a rumor going around that none of the dispatched guards ever came back. This probably isn't as simple as it sounds," Hayes explained. "Is that so? Are you fine with that? It might be dangerous." "I have no reason to be afraid. My God protects me," Hayes said calmly. Her faith was unshakable, and Kettle nodded in agreement. "I see," replied. "Also," Hayes trailed off and glanced at Kettle. She had known he would accept the request. Given her experiences with him, it was hard to imagine much truly threatening them if Kettle was present. "Still," Kettle mused, "I expected at least 10 people. This is a big job with good pay." Hayes let out a sheepish laugh. "There's also another rumor that's been spreading." "What rumor?" "Ha ha." Hayes let out an awkward laugh and subtly averted his gaze. Her gaze shifted to a silver-haired woman standing nearby. She was strikingly beautiful, but her expression was utterly unreadable. Her commanding presence caught everyone's attention, yet no one dared to approach her. "Aquez, the Inquisitor of Sun God, why is she here?" Hayes muttered to herself. Apparently, word had spread that Aquez was in the estate and would be working alongside anyone who took the request. There were not many mercenaries bold enough to risk being around the Inquisitor of the Sun God. "She's not planning to split my head open, is she?" Hayes asked, her tone half joking but laced with genuine concern. As someone who served another god, she could technically be labeled as a heretic. Kettle shook his head. "She won't do that. She is very polite and kind." Hayes's eyes grew wide. "Are you acquainted with Aquez?" "Of course, we're friends." Hayes felt dizzy at the notion that a barbarian and an inquisitor were on friendly terms. Kettle looked ready to prove it, striding over to Aquez in long, confident steps. Kettle," Hayes called after him. "It's fine," he assured her over his shoulder. He approached Aquez and greeted her. "It's good to see you again." "I don't recall ever becoming friends with you," Aquez replied. "Oh, you heard me," Kettle said with a chuckle. "Then how about we start being friends now?" Aquez remained silent, finding him difficult to deal with for many reasons. "So, are you really planning to crack open anyone's head?" he asked. "We do not deny other gods. In the distant past, there were holy wars, but we no longer commit such acts." "Interesting. Is that priestess also a follower of another god?" Aquez asked, glancing in Hayes's direction. "She is a priestess that serves the god of lies and deception. She's a good friend of mine." "You mean Kaloja," Aquez said, her voice calm but tinged with subtle surprise. "Oh, so you're familiar," Kettle remarked, intrigued. "I am aware of all the great beings that exist in this world," Aquez replied evenly, though a flicker of curiosity crossed her face. "So, she's a priestess of Kaloja." "That's what I've been told. Is there an issue?" Kettle asked. "No, I was just under the impression that Kaloja's followers were in a period of dormancy. As far as I know, only those in very high-ranking positions are able to act during such times." "Ahem. It's nothing. I don't claim to know every detail about every religious order. Perhaps it's my mistake," Aquez replied, shaking her head. Kettle stroked his chin thoughtfully before speaking again. "So, the fact that you're here, does that mean it's time? You know about the divine oracle." "That, I cannot say. The divine has not revealed the exact timing to us. This request may simply be a case of losing contact with the village." This uncertainty was precisely why Lord Barkan had been preparing for all possibilities, assembling the guards and hearing mercenaries to send as a task force. "But the possibility still exists," Kettle pressed. Aquez did not deny it, and Kettle's expression turned even more intrigued. "The great evil, is it?" Kettle asked. The term itself brought to mind a certain kind of being, one Kettle could imagine without much difficulty. Soon after, the guard commander arrived, leading his men. He scanned the gathered mercenaries before his eyes landed on Kettle. His expression immediately shifted to one of resigned acknowledgement. "Of course you're here," the commander said. "Why would I pass up on something that sounds this interesting?" Kettle replied with a grin. "It's not as exciting as you think, but regardless, you're welcome," the commander said without much concern. Despite the unusual circumstances, his demeanor remained calm. The reason for his composure was simple: the presence of Aquez, the Inquisitor of the Sun God. The commander felt reassured knowing such a powerful figure was on their side. He was certain no challenge would remain unsolved. He held no doubt about Aquez's ability to handle anything that came their way. "Let's get moving," the commander ordered. The guards and mercenaries began gathering and organizing themselves. Kettle observed the scene with satisfaction. "Good," he murmured. Moving as a group wasn't an unfamiliar concept to him. In the white snowfield, he had hunted monsters alongside his comrades on several occasions. But that was limited to the white snowfield. a place that could hardly be called a part of this fantastical world. And his comrades, the terrifying barbarians of the snowfield, could hardly form anything resembling a cohesive unit. This, however, was a true group: mercenaries, a priestess, a barbarian, and an inquisitor. It felt like a raid party from one of the epic stories he had heard about. Kettle found the current situation immensely satisfying, a smile spreading across his face. The guard commander, noticing Kettle's odd expression, spoke up. "Follow us. Lady Aquez, we're counting on you as well." Aquez nodded silently, and the group began their journey toward the troubled village. The group left the estate and began their journey toward the troubled village. The distance wasn't short. It would take them half a day even if they walked continuously. So, when they reached the halfway point, the guard commander suggested taking a break. The guards loosened their armor and began to rest. Kettle also sat down by a tree, closed his eyes, and leisurely enjoyed the scent of grass and the gentle breeze. At that moment, he sensed someone approaching him. The presence hesitated, fidgeting as if uncertain before cautiously moving closer. It wasn't a familiar presence. It was the first time a stranger had approached him first. Kettle opened his eyes. "Eek!" The sudden gaze startled the man, causing him to let out a shrill cry. "Hello." "Greetings," Kettle replied. The man had an intelligent-looking face. Gathering his courage, he carefully spoke. "Are you Kettle, by any chance?" "Yes, I am." "Aha, I thought so." The man bowed deeply. "Thank you, I owe you my life." Kettle tilted his head, puzzled. The man continued, speaking cautiously. "About the recent dungeon incident." "Ah!" Kettle exclaimed as realization dawned on him. Cardos had taken about 9 people hostage. The man in front of him was one of them. Upon closer look, Kettle vaguely remembered his face, though at the time the man's expression had been vacant and unrecognizable. "You were one of the captives. I'm glad you're safe," Kettle said. "Haha, thanks to you." The man scratched the back of his head awkwardly. "You saved my life, and I thought I had to thank you at least once. So, thank you so much for rescuing me." The man bowed deeply again. If not for Kettle, he would have been killed and turned into a plaything of the Lick. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that he was alive today because of Kettle. Kettle felt equally pleased. Knowing that his actions had saved someone's life filled him with great joy. "By the way, what should I call you?" Kettle asked. "Oh, I haven't introduced myself yet," the man replied, straightening his modest attire. "My name is ch28. I am a mage. Well, technically an apprentice mage since I haven't officially earned the title yet." "A mage, you say?" Kettle's eyes widened in interest. The man flinched under his gaze. "Did I say something unnecessary?" ch28 thought nervously. Barbarians and mages didn't get along well. Barbarians despised mages, viewing them as weaklings who relied on tricks, while mages mocked barbarians as ignorant brutes. However, Kettle was the one who had saved him. ch28 had thought it necessary to explain himself, but now he regretted it. However, instead of disdain, Kettle leaned in with a curious expression. "So, you can use magic?" "And no, not yet. I'm still just an apprentice." "An apprentice," Kettle said, intrigued. ch28 began to explain. He had been an ordinary village youth until a passing mage recognized his potential to wield mana. The mage had granted him permission to pursue the path of magic, accepting him as a temporary apprentice. "Oh, I didn't know that was possible," Kettle mused. "It's rare, but apparently there are cases like mine. They say magical talent sometimes manifests out of nowhere." "Then, does that mean you already knew about the mist?" Kettle asked. "Not exactly, but the mage said that I showed potential to manifest mist, and that potential led me to the path of magic." "What an interesting journey," Kettle said, impressed. It was the quintessential fantasy tale. Yet, at the same time, it stirred a sense of melancholy within him. "I haven't even had the chance to check if I have that kind of talent," Kettle thought. He quickly brushed away the fleeting gloom. A village boy being chosen by a wandering master, it was practically a protagonist's story. Naturally, Kettle's curiosity grew. "So why are you here?" he asked. My master's first command was to reach the magic tower on my own, Guration replied. The mage tower, Kettle's eyes sparkled. Among the knowledge he had gleaned from the library, there had been mentions of the mage tower, a place where the greatest number of mages in the world resided. It was the hub of diverse schools of magic and home to many archmages conducting their research. The mage tower, Kettle repeated. So you're on your way there. Yes, unfortunately I got caught up in that mess with Cardos along the way. Guration shuddered, recalling the horrific experience. He now had another complaint to share with his master. I'd love to visit the mage tower someday, Kettle said. Excuse me? Guration looked at him in surprise. A barbarian visiting the mage tower was a pairing as unlikely as a fish living out of water. But Kettle's expression was utterly serious. Guration cautiously responded. If you ever come to the mage tower, mention the void-reflected shadow school and my name, Guration. I am just an apprentice, so I might not be of much help, but I will welcome you as best as I can. I'll remember that, Kettle said with a grin. However, Guration didn't dwell on it too much. Realistically, the idea of a barbarian setting foot in the mage tower was absurd. So, this commission is to fund your journey to the mage tower? Kettle asked. Yes, the task is simple and the pay is good. I saw no reason to refuse. There are ominous rumors about this job, Kettle noted. I've heard them too, but come on. The worst thing that could happen has already happened to me. What are the chances of that happening twice in a row? Guration shook his head, laughing lightly. Kettle merely smiled in silence. A few hours later, they arrived at the village as dusk began to fall, with the sun dipping below the horizon. The world was painted in a crimson hue as the group entered the village, their faces tense, weapons gripped tightly in anticipation. What do you think? The guard commander asked. I don't sense any presence, Aquez replied quietly. Then it's possible they simply fled, the frowned commander remarked, gesturing sharply. The guards quickly began to search the village. Mercenaries, it's your turn. Look for any signs or traces, the commander ordered. Yes. Understood. Kettle scanned the village. It wasn't large, barely big enough to house around 100 people. Yet, it wasn't a number that could vanish without leaving a trace. The guard commander was certain they would find something, even if it was small. However, the more they searched, the stranger things became. One of the guards approached with a bewildered expression. There's food left behind. It could be from people fleeing in a hurry, the commander explained. No, that's not what I mean, sir. There's freshly cooked food, still warm, the guard clarified. What? The commander's face hardened. Show me. The guard led him to a small house. Inside, a table was set with steaming potatoes and coffee. The rising steam indicated the food had been cooked just moments before their arrival. The commander's face twisted in confusion. What is this? Contact with the village had been lost several days ago. Since then, numerous groups had come but never returned. The commander considered two possibilities. Either the village had been overtaken and its occupants subdued, or as Aquez had suggested, some form of evil had descended upon the village. Yet both possibilities seemed to be disproven. If evil truly existed here, there wouldn't be freshly cooked food. And if someone had turned the village into a base, there should have been people around, but the village was deserted. Were there any traces of humans? The commander asked. None, sir, the guard replied, shaking his head in disbelief. There's no evidence of anyone leaving or hiding, not even a single footprint. The final possibility, that someone had fled in a rush after spotting their approach, was also ruled out. Just continue searching, the commander ordered. Yes, sir. The others were equally perplexed. There were signs of life everywhere, freshly cooked food, untouched belongings, but not a single person was present. It was as though the village had been abandoned in an instant, leaving behind an eerie feeling. The searchers felt a growing sense of unease. An hour later, the entire group gathered in the village square. What's the situation? The commander asked. "It's the same everywhere, sir," one of the guards reported. "There's evidence people were here moments ago, but no sign of anyone now. No tracks either." "Aquas, do you have any insights?" the commander asked. "I don't know," Aquas admitted, visibly unsettled. If evil had descended upon this place, the land itself should have been shrouded in darkness. Yet the village felt entirely ordinary, as if nothing had happened. And yet, the strange circumstances were too unnatural to dismiss as coincidence. The group murmured anxiously, but even Aquas could not provide an answer. As the guard commander bit his lip in frustration, his gaze landed on Kettle. "Do you know anything?" Kettle, who had once defeated a swordmaster, was a man of extraordinary strength. If anyone could uncover something, it would be him. However, Kettle also shook his head. "I didn't find anything unusual either. There are signs of life, but no evidence of anyone leaving the village. I can't sense any presence either." "This is maddening," the commander groaned. Even with two transcendent-level individuals in their midst, they had found nothing. As the commander wrestled with his thoughts, Kettle suddenly spoke. "Instead of driving ourselves crazy, why not ask someone who might know?" he asked. "Aquas doesn't know either," the commander replied. "I wasn't talking about her. There's someone else, isn't there?" Kettle replied casually. "What?" The commander's eyes widened. Kettle tilted his head as though surprised. "What? You didn't notice?" "W8, what are you talking about?" the commander stammered. "Exactly what I said. Didn't you find someone here in the village?" The commander froze, his mind racing. He scanned the faces around him, and then he saw her. There was a woman, a face he hadn't seen when they started their journey. She was so seamlessly blended among the group that no one had noticed her arrival. Or rather, it should have been impossible not to notice her. She was breathtakingly beautiful, to the point of being unnatural. The commander could not believe such an exquisite woman suddenly appeared without anyone realizing it. Except for Kettle, no one else had noticed her presence. The woman looked at Kettle with curiosity. "How interesting. My disguise was perfect. How did you notice me?" "When the numbers suddenly increase, and a new face appears, it's impossible not to notice," Kettle said bluntly. "No, that's not what I mean. You shouldn't have been able to perceive that fact at all. Even the great inquisitor of the sun god couldn't detect me," she said with a sly smile, her eyes brimming with intrigue as she stared at Kettle. "You don't seem like someone who's awakened to the mist. Who are you? You're an unexpected discovery." "Everyone, step back!" the guard commander shouted, snapping out of his daze. The group scrambled to distance themselves from the woman, forming a wide circle around her. "Aquas?" the commander asked urgently. "I didn't feel her presence either," Aquas whispered, her voice tinged with dread. Aquas, an inquisitor of the sun god, was among the best in detecting evil and demonic presence. The fact that she couldn't sense anything meant one of two things. Either this woman wasn't evil or demonic, or she was such a high-level being that even Aquas couldn't perceive her. The woman sighed in boredom. "Ah, what a shame. I wanted to tag along and visit your estate." "Sorry, but I can't allow that," Kettle said firmly. "No, it's fine. This is amusing enough, so I will let it slide," the woman replied with a chuckle. As she laughed, her form began to melt away like an insect shedding its skin. Her human shape crumbled, and something far more sinister emerged. A massive, overwhelming presence of evil filled the air, and the mercenaries and guards' faces turned pale. Aquas's face reflected pure horror. "I've made my decision." A voice rumbled, shaking their minds and gnawing at their consciousness. It was the voice of an overwhelming evil. "Amusing barbarian, I will take you as my slave to hell." "I think I'll enjoy that journey," Kettle replied, laughing heartily, the only one unshaken. Evil seeped into the world, dark and vile. Filthy shadows descended upon the mortal realm, filling the air with a nauseating stench that spread in all directions. The people were horrified. This place was no longer part of the mortal plane. It had become a land corrupted by evil. Aquas shouted desperately, "Everyone run!" Even before her words registered, the group had already begun to flee. However, the moment they reached the village's outskirts, they collided with an invisible barrier. No, this can't be happening. Let us out, open it up. They banged their fists against the violet barrier, but it stood unyielding, like an impregnable wall. Meanwhile, the demon laughed gleefully. This village is my domain. None of you will escape. You are all my prey. And then, the demon revealed her true form. Her twisted horns resembled those of a vile, violet lamb. Her eyes, with black sclerae and stark white pupils, were deeply unsettling. Her attire was provocative, exposing bronzed skin that gleamed as if kissed by sunlight. Hayes screamed as if to dispel her disbelief. A demon? No, this is impossible. How could a demon appear here? Is that really a demon? Kettle asked. Yes, Hayes cried out, panic clear in her voice. And not just any demon, a named demon. Oh, great Kaloja, please save me. Protect me from the taint of this vile evil. She fell to her knees, frantically praying, her words a blur of desperation. Kettle stepped forward and placed his large hand on her head. Calm yourself, Hayes. I am here with you. Hayes stammered, her trembling subsiding under the weight of Kettle's reassuring hand. Her wide, fearful eyes slowly began to regain clarity as she stood unsteadily. Thank you, she whispered. Kettle tilted his head slightly, curiosity sparking in his gaze. I have a question. What does it mean for a demon to have a name? Hayes gulped, her words faltering as she explained. It means exactly what it sounds like. In this world, there were countless beings referred to as demons. However, not all of them were powerful. Some were so weak that even an ordinary woodcutter could defeat them with a bit of luck. These entities, often misnamed as demons, were simply fragments of darkness and malevolent energy. But the ones who could truly be called demons, those were different. A true demon was born in the cradle of darkness, without a mother, and claimed a name through sheer will. Even the weakest of demons with a name had the power to shake an entire kingdom to their core. Kettle furrowed his brow thoughtfully. Are the kingdoms of this world that fragile? This is the second time I've encountered beings capable of such destruction. What do you mean by that? Hayes stammered. Nothing, just thinking out loud, Kettle replied dismissively. So that demon has a name then? Why, yes, Hayes confirmed, her gaze locked fearfully on the demon. From the shape of her horns, that demon must be Ashishiar. She appeared centuries ago. But why would such an entity manifest in this remote corner of the world? Yet, regardless of the reason, the reality was undeniable. Ashishiar had descended upon this land. The barrier trapped them, leaving no way to escape. Kettle mused, staring at the violet barrier with a fascinated expression. Is this unbreakable? Yes, this place is already part of the demon's domain. Unless someone aids us from the outside, there's no way to breach it. The only way to escape is to defeat the demon, Hayes explained. I see. Kettle's tone was calm, as if contemplating something mundane. Oh, mighty Kaloja, please forgive me for placing my faith in someone who serves another god, Hayes muttered to herself. Aquez, the inquisitor of the sun god, stood silently, her piercing eyes locked onto Ashishiar. The group's survival depended on her ability to defeat the demon. Kettle, meanwhile, casually approached the barrier and tapped it lightly, almost as if knocking on a door. Crack. The barrier fractured, spider-web-like cracks spreading outward from the point of contact. The people, too preoccupied with fear to watch, kept their eyes shut tightly. Oh dear, Kettle muttered, hurriedly withdrawing his hand. Deciding to stay in the moment, Kettle shifted his attention to the standoff between the demon and the Inquisitor. His eyes sparkled with interest. This was a battle between divine light and infernal darkness, a tale as old as time itself. This should be fun, Kettle remarked with a grin. Aquez stared coldly at the demon, while Ashishiar dismissed her gaze with a mocking smile. Demon, so you've been playing tricks, Aquez said. What did you think? Wasn't it fun? Didn't it ignite your desire to investigate? Ashishiar replied, her tone laced with amusement. Disgusting antics, Aquas muttered, narrowing her eyes. The traces in the village, remnants that looked as though people had just been there, now made sense. The demon had staged it all, purely for her amusement. How did a being like you descend into this world? Aquas asked, her tone sharp. A named demon's summoning required an enormous sacrifice. The population of this small village wouldn't have been sufficient. Establishing her domain in such a remote area without drawing attention was equally impossible. The very idea was utterly implausible. Do you think I'd tell you? Ashishiar asked, her lips curving into a sly smile. Her mocking laughter filled the air, and Aquas's expression twisted in revulsion. How dare such a vile demon pollute this land? Vile, impure, Ashishiar bared her teeth, a scornful grin spreading across her face. Ha, that's just a standard you gods came up with, a judgment you imposed on us without any basis. Her laughter erupted again, filled with malice. The sound was so oppressive that the people around her covered their ears in agony. Ha ha ha, yes, we lost to you. We handed over this world and were cast into that wretched hell of yours. Long ago, gods and humans joined forces in a great clash against the demons. The victors were the gods and humans, and the demons were banished from the world. But not anymore, Ashishiar declared. The world is fracturing. This world no longer belongs solely to you. Aquas fell silent, her mind racing to process the demon's ominous words. But there was no time to dwell on them. Ashishiar bowed gracefully, her movements disturbingly elegant. I am Ashishiar, the demon of oppression, she introduced herself, her greedy eyes locking onto Aquas. Great and noble inquisitor of the sun god, I wonder, what would your flesh taste like? Ashishiar grinned wickedly, revealing shark-like teeth. Disgusting creature. Aquas spat, her face etched with disdain. Return to where you belong. This world belongs to us and the gods. Raising her hand toward the sky, Aquas murmured a short prayer. Descend upon me. Boom. A pillar of light cracked down from above, enveloping Aquas in radiant energy. Slowly, the divine light began to infuse her body. The demon watched silently, her lips curling into a smirk. Meanwhile, Kettle's eyes sparkled with excitement. Oh, the demon is not attacking during the transformation phase. Even in fantasy, that rule applies, huh? What are you talking about? That makes no sense, Hayes shouted incredulously. Aquas wasn't transforming in the way Kettle imagined. She was borrowing the divine power from her god, a process so concentrated with holy energy that any interference would likely backfire. That was why Ashishiar observed without intervening. It wasn't some unspoken rule about transformations. Kettle nodded knowingly. Ah, I see. So that's how it works here, makes sense. What are you even talking about? Hayes exclaimed, her face a mixture of confusion and frustration. As the divine pillar faded, Aquas's appearance had completely transformed. She now donned golden armor that gleamed with divine radiance. In her hands, she wielded a massive mace and a towering shield. She silently adjusted her stance, her expression calm yet resolute. Ashishiar, still grinning, extended her hand into the air. The shadows blanketing the ground rose and coalesced into her hand, forming a weapon, a hammer shaped from pure darkness. Let's see what you've got, dog of the gods, Ashishiar sneered. Before her words had even fully registered, Aquas lunged forward, her feet digging into the ground with such force that dirt exploded around her. In an instant, she was directly in front of the demon. Aquas raised her mace, and Ashishiar, laughing gleefully, swung her dark hammer to meet the attack. Clang! Golden light and darkness collided violently, sending distorted shockwaves rippling through the air. Ugh. The sheer force of the clash caused the surrounding people to cry out in pain. The oppressive mix of divine energy and malevolence was unbearable for ordinary humans. Only Kettle watched the battle with a delighted expression, as if it were a grand spectacle. Thud. Aquas slammed her massive rectangular shield into the ground and charged forward like a raging boar. Ashishiar smirked, her mocking tone cutting through the tension. Fighting without grace? Don't you even know the art of combat, you mindless dog? In sync with her words, Ashishiar spun her hammer elegantly, creating a swirling motion that obscured her form. Her graceful movements belied the immense power she wielded. Aquez's charge struck only empty earth. Up here, Ashishiar said with a sing-song tone. The demon reappeared directly above Aquez, her hammer raised. Aquez quickly brought up her shield, preparing for the inevitable strike. But instead of attacking, Ashishiar gently pressed her hand against the shield. Be crushed. Crunch. Darkness poured from Ashishiar's hand, pressing down on the shield with a crushing force. The overwhelming pressure bore down on Aquez, as if an enormous boulder were pinning her in place. Urgh, Aquez groaned, her voice strained in pain. The weight of the darkness was immense, carrying tangible physical force. Ashishiar grinned, channeling even more energy into her attack. Slowly, Aquez's knees began to buckle under the pressure. But then Aquez's lips parted, and she whispered, Carmenin, chapter 5, verse 59. Its radiance burned all that was impure. Xing. Light gathered into Aquez's mace as she gripped it tightly. With newfound determination, she charged forward once more. Ashishiar's expression turned serious as she swung her hammer to meet the attack. Boom. The clash of light and darkness grew fiercer. The impact sent shockwaves rippling through the air, forcing people to the ground, unable to remain standing. The collision of these two opposing forces shook the earth and made the air tremble. Waves of energy spread out in every direction. The proximity to such a battle between light and darkness was unbearable for ordinary people. Some coughed up blood and collapsed unconscious, unable to endure the overwhelming clash of divine and malevolent forces. Only Kettle watched the scene with wide-eyed excitement. "Ooh, how magnificent," he exclaimed. "Eek!" Hayes screamed from behind him, unable to suppress her terror. She couldn't fathom Kettle's calm demeanor. The sheer intensity of the divine and demonic forces was enough to shake her body and mind, making it nearly impossible to stay conscious. Yet, here he was, standing nonchalantly as if enjoying a spectacle. The battle raged on. Little by little, the demon was being pushed back. Hayes's eyes glimmered with a faint sense of hope. "I knew it," she whispered. Aquez wasn't just an inquisitor of the sun god. She was regarded as a prodigy even among her peers. If anyone could defeat the demon, it was her. However, the gap in power between them wasn't overwhelming. Hayes realized they could confidently win the battle if someone else helped out Aquez, and standing there was someone capable of providing that assistance. "Kettle, can't you help Lady Aquez?" Hayes asked desperately. Kettle was strong. From what she had discerned, he was at least above advanced level. While she couldn't gauge the full extent of his power, the fact that he was completely unaffected by the battle's shockwaves suggested he could meaningfully influence the fight. Kettle nodded, acknowledging her words. "It's possible." "Then could you?" "But why should I?" Kettle interrupted. "Huh," Hayes looked up at him, startled. Kettle's eyes remained glued to the battle, his face alight with childlike wonder. "I've been longing to witness such a grand fight," he said with a grin. A servant of a god and a demon were two beings that represented the most irreconcilable forces in a fantasy world. And the two of them were clashing in front of him, denying each other's existence and wielding their powers in an epic battle. It was a spectacle he had dreamed of even in his sleep. "Why would I interfere and ruin the fight?" he asked. What?" Hayes stammered. "Of course, I do have the desire to fight a demon myself," Kettle admitted. "But more than that, I want to watch this battle." Hayes was at a loss for words. "Does the scripture itself grant them power, or is it just a way to channel their god's blessing?" Kettle mused to himself, his tone more curious than serious. "If so, could I do that too? No, that's probably not how it works. It's likely a blessing granted to those who serve the gods. So, does that mean I could receive such a blessing if I pledged myself to the sun god?" Kettle's face lit up with excitement as he muttered to himself, lost in thought. Hayes could do nothing but stare at him in stunned silence. Hayes thought she knew Kettle well enough. Having cleared 2 dungeons together, she believed she had a grasp of what kind of person he was. He was peculiar and highly curious, but fundamentally, he was a good person. He showed consideration for others and carried himself with courtesy. Deep down, she had assumed the barbarian was a unique yet ordinary being surviving in this world. However, something felt off right now. There was an alien quality to him. He was not someone who shared her values. She realized this unsettling truth. Hayes suddenly felt that the barbarian had grown distant. Boom. Amidst these thoughts, the battle raged on. Light and darkness clashed, their shockwaves sweeping across the battlefield. Clang. Ashishiar violently struck her hammer against Aquaz's shield and staggered back. Her hammer had the remnants of the golden divine light, which she shook off swiftly. As expected of the dog of the gods, Ashishiar thought. She knew her power was superior to Aquaz. The gap between them was undeniable, so big that she would win all 100 times if they fought that many battles. Yet their compatibility wasn't favorable. In this world, magic could never overcome the power of the gods. Moreover, Aquaz could recite scriptures. The scriptures were the words of the gods, and reading them allowed one to channel divine power more directly. At this rate, the battle would stretch on endlessly, and there was even a chance she could lose. Ashishiar needed to seize the upper hand. She swung her hammer, confusing Aquaz for a moment, as she wasn't the target. However, her expression quickly shifted. With a thunderous stomp, Aquaz surged forward, raising her shield before the others. Boom! Darkness collided with her shield and exploded. Screams erupted from the mercenaries and the guards behind her. Had she failed to block Ashishiar's attack, they would have been torn apart by the darkness. "You vile creature," Aquaz said. "Did you honestly expect fairness from a demon?" Ashishiar mocked her. Aquaz's expression didn't falter. No demon would have allowed others into their domain just to let them spectate the battle. Attacking the others was clearly a ploy to hinder her. Knowing this, Aquaz spoke calmly. Material, Chapter 1, Verse 1. The radiant domain of gold is born. A golden sanctuary unfolded, a divine domain no evil could penetrate. "Everyone, come here," she commanded. Thank you, Lady Aquaz." The people scrambled into the protective zone Aquaz had created. Ashishiar laughed mockingly. "Are you sure you can afford to waste such a precious scripture?" "Shut up," Aquaz snapped, charging at her fiercely. Ashishiar retaliated with her hammer. Boom. The battle took a sharp turn. Aquaz's divine aura began to wane, and she could no longer perfectly block Ashishiar's attacks. The scriptures embodied the words of the gods. Reciting them granted overwhelming power, but the cost was equally steep. It wasn't a force one could wield freely. Aquaz's disadvantage quickly became evident. Watching her struggle, Ashishiar cackled. "How foolish! Sacrificing your strength and heading toward defeat just to save a handful of insignificant mortals. Pathetic." Aquaz didn't respond, instead swinging her mace. Ashishiar intercepted the blow with her hammer. The sun god's divine energy no longer corroded her weapon. Clang. As their bodies closed in, Ashishiar whispered coldly, "Death means nothing. It's just death. No one will remember your noble sacrifice." If Aquaz lost here, everyone trapped in the domain of darkness would die, and Ashishiar would reveal herself to the world. Aquaz's defeat would be known, and with it, the shame of her god. "The first dog of the sun god is going to die here. You will tarnish both your own and your god's honor. But if you strike me down, everyone will sing your praises, and your god's influence will grow." For that to happen, Aquaz would need to give her all, which meant abandoning the people here. Ashishiar smiled faintly. "It's very simple. Withdraw the sanctuary protecting them. They're non-believers who don't worship your god, heretics." Aquaz was an inquisitor, one who judged heretics. "If taking their lives troubles you, don't worry. Leave it to me. All you have to do is close your eyes and block your ears," Ashishiar continued. Shut up! As if the words weren't worth acknowledging, Aquez gripped her shield tightly and charged. The ground shattered, sending Ashishiar flying. Ashishiar smirked. Are you choosing to die here and insult your god? Instead of replying, Aquez slammed her foot down and swung her glowing mace. Clang! Ashishiar blocked it but was visibly startled. Usually, humans cornered to this extent would give up on those they protected. They would utter hollow promises of vengeance for the fallen. Ashishiar enjoyed mocking their contradictions, their selfish desire to survive. However, Aquez was genuinely unwilling to abandon the people. Ashishiar's gaze flickered. Is that virtue what captivated your god? Then die as a martyr. Boom! Ashishiar's attacks intensified, darkness enveloping Aquez. Her overwhelming speed disoriented Aquez, throwing her off balance. Material, Chapter 3, Verse 12. The luminous sanctuary shall drive away. Enough! Before Aquez could finish, Ashishiar clamped her hand over her mouth. I've heard enough of your god's words. Boom! She slammed Aquez into the ground and raised her hammer for a final strike. Aquez barely managed to lift her shide. Crash! The hammer shattered the shield. With a snap of Ashishiar's fingers, darkness engulfed Aquez entirely. Ugh, Aquez stammered. The battle was over. The golden sanctuary protecting the people vanished. No. Despairing cries erupted. The Inquisitor had lost to the demon. They were all doomed. Ashishiar reveled in their screams. I'll savor you as dessert later, but first, let's see what the sun god's precious dog tastes like. She opened her mouth, revealing sharp, shark-like teeth. Aquez didn't close her eyes. With unwavering resolve, she glared at the evil threatening her. Annoyed, Ashishiar sneered. Such pretty eyes. I want to see them twisted in agony. As she leaned in to bite, a voice interrupted. That's far enough. Kettle had seized Ashishiar's shoulder. What? She was stunned. How, Ashishiar thought. She hadn't sensed any movement. Before she could process it, an immense force flung her backward. She collided with her own barrier. Boom. That was an interesting fight, Kettle remarked casually, brushing his hands off. But she is my friend. I won't let her die. He extended a hand toward the fallen Aquez and said, Are you all right? Aquez stared at him blankly. Aquez had used every means at her disposal, yet she was defeated. She had resigned herself to death. Because of this, she had momentarily forgotten Kettle's existence. He was the one who had defeated Swordmaster Kine, a transcendent swordsman. He possessed the ability to intervene in their battle and change the course of the fight. You, Ashishiar, who had been slammed into her own barrier, staggered to her feet. Her expression portrayed her irritation, as though someone had ruined their feast. You insolent barbarian! How dare you interrupt my meal? My apologies, but she is my friend. I cannot let her die, Kettle replied calmly. I was planning to let you live, even as a toy, Ashishiar sneered. Unfortunately, I have no intention of being used by anyone. Is that so? Ashishiar smirked as darkness coalesced, forming a hammer in her hands. In that case, you will die here today. Step back, Aquez exclaimed, struggling to her feet. You cannot defeat a demon. I think I'm stronger than you might think, Kettle said with a nonchalant shrug. No, Aquez insisted, her voice resolute. Anyone who does no wield divine power cannot defeat a demon. It wasn't a matter of strength. Only divine power could banish a named demon from this world. Any other force would be futile. This was a law established since the beginning, when gods and demons came into existence. Moreover, this was the demon's domain. No stroke of luck could be expected. The barbarians stood no chance of defeating the demon. At Aquez's words, Kettle stroked his chin thoughtfully, as if intrigued. So, only gods can stand against demons. What an interesting concept. Step aside, I will handle this, Aquez insisted. Even if you say that, Kettle replied, glancing at her, you don't look like you're in any condition to fight. Her once golden armor had been tainted and corroded by the darkness. Her shield was shattered, and the hand holding her mace trembled uncontrollably. The outcome was clear. Aquez had lost, and yet the Inquisitor's eyes still burned with determination. "This is my duty. I serve the Sun God. It is my purpose to stand against evil," she said. But no matter her resolve, her body betrayed her, swaying unsteadily. "So this is what it means to be a believer. Impressive," grinned, amused. He was satisfied about what he had witnessed today. This Inquisitor truly possessed the faith and heart worthy of one who served the god. "I've seen something remarkable from you." With those words, Kettle gently leaned Aquez's frail body against the broken pillar of a ruined hose. Aquez staggered, but managed to steady herself against the support. "But leave the rest to me. I've always wanted to see what it's like to fight a demon," Kettle said with a faint smile. "You foolish barbarian, you don't understand, do you? You cannot defeat me," Ashishiar mocked. "Judging by that strength earlier, you're strong, I'll give you that, but that's it. You cannot wield divine power, so you will never be able to bring me down." "Shall we put that to the test?" Kettle asked, smiling serenely. Ashishiar's grin turned sadistic. One of her greatest joys was breaking those who overestimated their own strength and devouring them afterward. "I want to see your eyes contort in agony," Ashishiar said. As soon as the words left her lips, she vanished. Darkness parted as she reappeared directly in front of Kettle. It was a leap through space, not a simple movement, leaving no time for reaction. Even Aquez, with her divine sense, wouldn't have been able to detect the attack in time. Shadow silently reached for Kettle's neck. "No," Aquez whispered weakly, envisioning Kettle's broken form in her mind. However, something very different had happened. Crack. Ashishiar's head shattered. Aquez's eyes widened. "What?" The headless body of Ashishiar staggered and then collapsed. Kettle glanced at his fist and gave a small nod. "She's not as resilient as I expected." "Huh," Aquez muttered blankly. Kettle's attack was so fast that it was completely invisible to her naked eye. The last thing she remembered was Ashishiar's hammer descending toward Kettle's head. Yet in the blink of an eye, Ashishiar's head had been destroyed. Kettle was brushing off his fist casually. Did he crush her head with his fist? Aquez wondered. At a speed beyond her perception, he had smashed a demon's head with nothing more than his bare hand. How is that even possible? Her thoughts swirled in a chaotic mix of confusion and horror. Meanwhile, Kettle calmly observed the headless body. Suddenly, the fallen body began to fade, the ground darkened, and shadows rose from a distance. Ashishiar emerged from the darkness, intact once more. So, even if your head is destroyed, you regenerate. You're quite different from those skeleton monsters," Kettle mused, clearly intrigued. Ashishiar's expression mirrored Aquez's confusion. Doubly what just happened. She couldn't see Kettle's attack either. She thought her hammer was about to strike, yet it was her head that had been obliterated. What are you?" Ashishiar asked. "I'm just a simple barbarian," Kettle replied nonchalantly. "Don't lie to me," Ashishiar narrowed her eyes. The dark energy around her seemed to fixate on Kettle. "I don't see any trace of magic or aura." Kettle wasn't using any magic, aura, or any other discernible energy. That realization only deepened her frustration. Determined to get answers, she pushed her doubts aside, grabbed her hammer, and vanished into the shadows. Clang. She reappeared right beside Kettle, her hammer swinging fiercely as she gouged the earth. Kettle watched her silently, almost leisurely. Her human form is a bit unnerving. She was a striking beauty, not quite on the level of the elf queen, but still captivating enough to turn heads. But then again, Kettle thought, she's still a demon. There is no reason for me to hold back. Crack. A massive hole appeared in her chest. Unable to withstand the impact, Ashishiar was flung backward, colliding with her own barrier. Ugh! Ashishiar staggered to her feet, the gaping hole in her chest rapidly filling with darkness. Kettle let out a soft whistle of intrigue. "You're regenerating immediately. That's interesting. I wonder how it works." Ashishiar fell silent. The shock was evident in her eyes. It was nothing but a punch, no aura, no magical enhancement. It was just a raw, physical punch. It was simply so fast and so powerful that she couldn't even perceive it. Oh, Kettle stroked his chin thoughtfully, then nodded as if he had made a decision. He moved, and his figure vanished. When he reappeared, he was directly in front of Ashishiar. You... Ashishiar attempted to raise her hammer in panic, but Kettle was faster. His hand shot out. She shouted. Kettle grabbed her arm and slammed her into the ground, the earth shattering with a deafening crash. Before she could react, Kettle raised his foot and stomped her head. Her head was severed from her body. Ashishiar's form dissolved into shadows once again, reforming at a distance. So, if your head is destroyed or severed, you regenerate completely. Otherwise, you simply heal. I'm assuming the core is located in your head, Kettle muttered, his tone analytical. You. Ashishiar's face twisted in rage at his detached analysis. She felt like nothing more than a plaything under his scrutiny. You think brute strength is enough to defeat me? This barbarian didn't use aura, magic, or any special powers. He was simply fast and overwhelmingly strong. That was all there was to him, and that fact enraged her even more. I am Ashishiar, demon of oppression. Do you think mere human strength can defy me? Even so, Kettle shrugged indifferently. You don't seem particularly impressive. You... Overwhelmed with fury, Ashishiar raised her hammer, dark energy coalescing around it, growing denser and heavier. She charged directly at him. However, it was pointless. The hammer stopped, caught by Kettle's fingers. A massive shockwave rippled outward, yet Kettle's stance didn't waver. Oh, Kettle nodded, impressed. It's quite heavy. Crash. Kettle tightened his grip, and Ashishiar's hammer shattered into fragments. Before she could react, his fist slammed into her face, obliterating her head once more. As her head regenerated, she ground her teeth in fury. This is absurd. How is this even possible? She was the demon of oppression. The darkness she commanded was imbued with a weight that defied the limits of matter and physical laws. In her domain, though not as powerful as in hell, she could still draw significant strength. At full power, she could infuse her hammer with the weight of an entire fortress. And yet, this barbarian had stopped her hammer with his bare fingers. He was just a mere human without even a trace of mist. This is impossible, she screamed in denial. Kettle simply smiled and raised his fist. The darkness swirled and trembled around him, but his fist tore through it all, shattering everything in its path. Boom. The battle was one-sided. It remained completely in Kettle's favor. Aquaz watched the scene in stunned silence. What am I even witnessing right now? Ashishiar was a demon who, centuries ago, had single-handedly brought down an entire kingdom. Even Aquaz, empowered by divine scriptures, had struggled just to hold her at bay. Yet here was Ashishiar, being pummeled by nothing more than Kettle's fists. A demon of Ashishiar's caliber, whose power embodied crushing physical force, was being physically overpowered. The fight was surreal, as if she were watching a human playing with an ant. Boom. Kettle tore Ashishiar's limbs apart, but she reappeared moments later, fully regenerated. You really don't die, Kettle remarked. He crushed her neck, broke her spine, tore her limbs, and punctured her torso. And still she returned unscathed. There were beings in the white snowfield that could not be killed either, but they were fundamentally different. The white snowfield's immortals existed because the concept of death was twisted for them. This demon, however, seemed to exist beyond the reach of death itself. So pure physical force can't kill you, Kettle murmured. It felt like facing an endlessly respawning monster. Still, it's not a big deal. An endlessly respawning ant was still just an ant. Aquaz, who had been watching in disbelief, snapped out of her daze. She couldn't afford to stand idle any longer. No matter how strong Kettle was, his strength was purely physical. He couldn't defeat a demon. She knew that her divine miracle was needed. She began to pray quietly, and a small flicker of divine light started gathering within her. Crack. Meanwhile, Ashishiar continued to be destroyed, over and over again. At some point, she began laughing. It was a hollow, defeated laugh. Ha ha, ha ha ha. The fury she had felt earlier had vanished entirely. Being treated like a mere plaything left her with nothing but laughter. She couldn't deny it anymore. The barbarian before her was overwhelmingly strong, far stronger than her. And with that realization came a single, burning question. What are you? She asked. Her disbelief and curiosity burned in her eyes as she stared at Kettle. As the demon of oppression, she was being utterly crushed by pure strength. It felt as though she were up against a god of power. I'm just a barbarian, Kettle answered simply. Ridiculous, she muttered, narrowing her eyes. But then a twisted smile spread across her face. Her eyes gleamed as she spoke. Well, this is refreshing. There's just one thing I want to try. I will test you with my full power. The darkness of her domain trembled ominously. It grew denser, compressing into a thin, deadly barrier. Aquas, still gathering divine energy, froze. The suffocating darkness was terrifyingly thick, far more concentrated than anything she had seen before. This is dangerous, she thought. Realizing the severity of the situation, she hastened her prayer, accelerating the recovery of her divine strength. Kettle, on the other hand, looked intrigued. So, this is a demon's full power. As if accepting the challenge, he lifted his axe. The compressed darkness erupted with force as Ashishiar unleashed her power. Pierce him, impale him, she screamed. Crack. The barrier exploded, releasing thousands upon thousands of razor-sharp spikes that shot toward Kettle. Each spike carried the destructive power of a ballista. Even the sturdiest fortress walls would crumble before this onslaught. And yet, Kettle just stood there, smiling. The spikes shattered and scattered as they struck him, failing to leave even the smallest scratch on his body. With a mighty swing of his axe and a powerful stomp, he sent the shattered fragments flying into the air like confetti. Ha! Ashishiar let out a breathless, incredulous sigh. What kind of monster are you? Boom! Kettle appeared in front of Ashishiar in an instant. Behind him, Aquaz's voice rang out. Carmenin, chapter 5, verse 59, its radiance burned all that was impure. A brilliant golden light enveloped Kettle's axe. His eyes glimmered with excitement. Oh, Kettle exclaimed. Even he could sense the sacred power emanating from the light. So, this is the power of the sun god. What are you waiting for? Strike her down. Aquaz shouted urgently at Kettle, who was gazing silently at his axe, not attacking the demon in front of him. Kettle shrugged, finally gripping the axe tightly. I'd like to observe a little longer, but I suppose this is enough. It's been fun, demon. Crunch. The axe buried itself deep into Ashishiar's chest. Divine energy surged into her, invading her core. Darkness evaporated under the holy light, and Ashishiar's presence began to rapidly fade. I've lost, she murmured softly. Well, that was fun, haha, Kettle said, his laugh hearty and carefree. It had been a deeply satisfying experience, witnessing a fight between a demon and an inquisitor, battling the demon himself, and even wielding divine power in his axe. He couldn't have asked for more. Curiously, Ashishiar's expression also seemed strangely content. Being banished back to hell is disappointing, but this hasn't been without its rewards. At least I've confirmed that someone as powerful as you exists in the mortal realm, Ashishiar remarked, her pale, pupil-less eyes fixed on Kettle. Still, this wasn't the best matchup for me. A different demon would have put up a better fight against you. Her abilities were rooted in absolute dominance through overwhelming force. This was her nature. However, this time, it had been different. Kettle was an opponent she could never overpower. What is your name, barbarian? Ashishiar asked. Kettle, just Kettle, a simple barbarian. No, don't, Aquaz shouted, frantic with alarm. She thought the fight was over, but she forgot about the most important thing. However, her cry came too late. Ashishiar grinned, baring her sharp teeth. Kettle, good. Hear me, all who dwell in hell. Her voice boomed, shaking the space around them. It wasn't a shout directed at the mortal realm, but a proclamation to her homeland, the abyss of hell itself. There is a barbarian named Kettle in the mortal realm. Let all beings of hell remember the name Kettle. Feast upon my memories and know him. Engrave the existence of Kettle in your minds. No, no, Aquas cried out in despair. At the same moment, tendrils of darkness surged toward Kettle. The shadows coiled around him, reaching deep within, attempting to brand his very soul. Ashishiar laughed maniacally. Ha ha ha, barbarian, now you are ours. We will make good use of your corpse later. The darkness raced across Kettle, seeking to engulf him entirely. A suffocating, all-consuming force that would have utterly corrupted any ordinary human. However, it did not affect Kettle at all. What did you do? Kettle asked, his tone calm and unbothered. Nothing had happened. The darkness writhed and twisted across his form, unable to find purchase. It stopped short, failing to touch his soul. Ashishiar's expression froze. What? The darkness had indeed tried to mark the barbarian, to etch his name into the abyss, but it had achieved nothing. Ah, I understand now. Realization dawned on Kettle's face. He nodded to himself, as if piecing together a puzzle. So this is what a demon's lie looks like. A decent trick for buying time, but it seems there's no one left to save you. ch28. Crunch. Kettle's axe came down mercilessly. Ashishiar's body dissolved into shadows, scattering into the void, leaving nothing behind. Silence fell. Left behind were Aquas, staring at Kettle with wide eyes, and Kettle himself, stretching as if he had just finished a refreshing workout. The group who had left to confirm the situation of the troubled village returned to the estate. They reported everything they had seen and experienced, and the estate descended into chaos. They reported that a demon had occupied the village, and not just any demon. It was Ashishiar, the demon of oppression. It was a demon with a name known well enough to be recorded in history books. A being whose descent alone would cause the entire continent to tremble had appeared in the village under the estate's jurisdiction. The guard commander clutched his stomach, claiming severe pain, while Lord Barkin buried his face in his hands. The Lord wondered why such a trial had come to his small estate. He wanted to curse even the gods in his despair. However, amidst this misfortune, there was a sliver of luck. The Inquisitor of the Sun God had successfully defeated the demon and banished it back to hell. Those who had left on the mission bore some injuries from the aftershocks of the battle, but miraculously, none of them had died. Of course, the corrupted village had been completely destroyed, resulting in the loss of more than 100 lives. However, considering the alternative of sacrificing countless lives to defeat the demon, losing one village seemed like a minimal cost. Had the demon chosen to move beyond the village and wreak havoc on the world, the toll would have easily reached thousands. With the news of the named demon's descent and her defeat, the estate was abuzz with rumors. News spread quickly, and Lord Barkin began pondering how to deal with the aftermath. Meanwhile, the individuals at the center of the rumors were gathered in the Sun God's church within the estate. It's quite noisy out there, Kettle remarked. It's no small matter, Aquas replied. The Lord must have a headache trying to sort all this out. The room they were in was a simple, austere chamber, likely a place where the nuns usually rested. In the modest room sat the Inquisitor of the Sun God and a barbarian who didn't believe in gods. Kettle broke the silence again. Are you really planning to leave right away? I think you should rest properly before setting out. Aquas, lying on the bed, didn't look well. It hadn't even been a full day since the battle with the demon, and the time was far too short for her to recover from the aftermath. Yet, her pale face held a firm determination. I cannot delay any longer, Aquas said, biting her lip. This has to be reported to the holy sanctum immediately. If that's your wish, so be it. I've already explained everything to Lord Barkin. Since this involves the kingdom's internal matters, I cannot interfere further. The rest is up to the Lord's judgment, she added. She slowly sat up and turned to Kettle, bowing deeply. First and foremost, I must thank you. Without your help, we would all have become playthings for the demon. No need for thanks, Kettle said with a grin. I was just saving a friend. That's all there is to it. So are we friends now? I am the Inquisitor of the Sun God. Are you certain you wish to establish a friendship with someone like me? Aquez asked, her expression conflicted. Why wouldn't I? It's not that it's impossible, but… Then that's settled, Kettle said with a hearty laugh. Aquez gave him a strange look. Someone like Kettle treating her with such familiarity was both perplexing and uncomfortable for her. Yet, there was a certain warmth to it she didn't entirely dislike. As you wish. I would not refuse the goodwill of my savior, she replied softly. Good, I had fun too, so it's fine. So that's what a demon is like. It was different, to say the least. Different, you say, Aquez muttered. To Kettle, crushing Ashishiar, the demon of oppression, seemed as trivial as squashing an insect. Aquez couldn't help but let out a bitter chuckle. What kind of barbarian is he? She thought. By the way, there's something I am curious about, Kettle said suddenly. What is it? Aquez asked, startled out of her thoughts. She quickly composed herself. What happens when you give a demon your name? Your reaction back then suggested it wasn't just a ploy to buy time. Initially, Kettle had thought the demon's threats about names were lies. Nothing seemed to happen, and he didn't feel any effects. However, Aquez's horrified reaction back then told a different story. It hadn't been mere deception. She had truly been alarmed. Aquez finally opened her mouth to explain. It's called branding. Branding? Kettle asked. A name is a fundamental part of one's existence. By giving a demon your name, they can etch a brand deep into your soul with their darkness. Once you're branded, it's impossible to remove it without a sacred blessing. The branding was like a beacon for malevolent beings, drawing them in like prey to a fragrant spice. Throughout history, those who were branded faced only two possible futures. Either they received a blessing and were saved by the gods, or they spent the rest of their lives being hunted by evil until they were inevitably killed. Huh, Kettle murmured, his curiosity piqued. So, have I been branded too? No, you haven't, Aquez replied hesitantly. There was, of course, a way to block branding. By wielding mist to fortify the soul, one could protect themselves. For those with sufficient power, it was entirely possible to resist a demon's branding. However, Kettle's situation didn't seem to fit the description. It wasn't even accurate to say that he blocked the branding. It was closer to the idea that it simply didn't touch him. It's a bit unclear, Aquez admitted. It's certain that your name has been announced in hell, Kettle. However, since the branding didn't occur, they cannot pinpoint your location. In this peculiar state, the denizens of hell were aware of Kettle's existence, but they had no means of tracking him. Unless the forces of evil directly descend into this world to pursue you, there shouldn't be any issues, Aquez murmured thoughtfully. Kettle's expression turned wry. So, there's a bounty on me. That's one way to look at it, she replied. But you don't need to worry. Unless you encounter evil again, there won't be any problems. In this world, direct descents of demonic entities were exceedingly rare. Aquez firmly believed that Kettle would likely never encounter another demon. Well, if that's the case, Kettle said, shrugging. Still, demons are fascinating. I couldn't kill her. That's their nature, she replied. If I had been defeated and you weren't there, it would have taken the mightiest warriors of the continent to stop Ashishiar. At the very least, this estate would have been completely destroyed. The defeat of an inquisitor would have caused an emergency among the various religious orders. However, mobilizing reinforcements would have taken time, and in that time, Ashishiar could have obliterated several estates. Had it not been for Kettle, this catastrophic scenario could have become a reality. However, Kettle frowned. She didn't seem that strong to me. Honestly, she was weaker than I expected. Aquez fell silent. She held back the words she wanted to say. She wanted to explain just how terrifying Ashishiar truly was. However, seeing how Kettle had toyed with her as if she were a mere plaything, she found herself at a loss for words. The barbarian of the White Snowfield, Aquez thought. Among the many mysterious regions in the world, the white snowfield was the largest and least understood. It was an extreme, uncharted territory unreachable by most humans. The fact that Kettle hailed from such a place finally began to make sense to her. Well, I suppose it makes sense if she couldn't be killed. Is divine power the only way to defeat a demon? Kettle asked. Sort of, Aquez replied. Strictly speaking, it's not about killing them. It's about banishing them. If a demon made a space into their domain, it becomes nearly indistinguishable from hell itself. Without a divine miracle, defeating them is impossible. That does sound like a pain, Kettle muttered. Without the power of the gods, defeating a demon wasn't even a question of strength. It was an impossibility. Essentially, if not for Aquez's presence, the estate would have been utterly defenseless. Do demons like that show up often? This world is starting to seem pretty dangerous, Kettle remarked. No, not at all, Aquez reassured him. The descent of a named demon is exceedingly rare, and for them to create a domain, even more so. Creating their domain required numerous sacrifices and an extended period of preparation. Usually, such preparations would be discovered by divine entities and thwarted long before completion. However, this time, things had been different. Without anyone noticing, Ashishiar had turned an entire village into her domain, without even the aid of a dark mage. By the time Aquez received the divine oracle about the situation, Ashishiar had already prepared to create her domain. How could this have happened? Aquez murmured, her face clouded with doubt. This was an anomaly, something that should have been impossible, and yet it had happened. The world was changing in strange ways. Aquez shook her head to clear her thoughts. Still, if the demon didn't create her domain, you could have defeated her easily, Kettle. For a regular descent, aura can be used to banish them. But I don't use aura, Kettle replied casually. What? Her eyes widened in shock. Are you a mage then? Nope, I can't use mana either. Then, are you a spirit summoner? No, I think you're misunderstanding something. I don't use mist at all, not currently anyway. Kettle emphasized his last words, his tone deliberate. Aquez's expression turned into pure disbelief. No mist at all. I spoke to Kine about this, Kettle explained. He said my body is a bit unusual, making it difficult to follow the path of mist. ch28, Aquez stammered, raising her hand to halt him. Taking a moment to gather her thoughts, she stared at him in utter astonishment. She thought back to what happened in the village. Kettle had blocked the demon of oppression's attacks with a single finger, shattered thousands of spikes with his bare body, and charged forward without hesitation. She wondered if all of that was purely from his physical prowess. Is that even possible? She thought. She stared at Kettle as if trying to determine whether he was a real human. Kettle, meanwhile, stroked his chin thoughtfully. So, without creating a domain, demons can be banished with something like aura or another force created by mist. Why, yes, Aquez stuttered, still trying to process her thoughts. Highly concentrated mist could banish them. And what about inside the domain? Do you think a hero can banish them inside it? Kettle asked. Impossible, Aquez answered firmly. Without a divine miracle, no one can defeat a demon within their domain. Her voice carried a sense of finality, as if stating immutable truth. Kettle's curiosity deepened. So, someone like me, who can't use mist, could never defeat a demon. You might be able to stop their summoning, but once they're summoned, you would need someone like me, a follower of a god, or a strong ally capable of wielding divine power to defeat them. Kettle leaned forward slightly, intrigued. It makes me wonder, what exactly is a demon? Demons were beings that could only be defeated with the power of the gods. If humans can't defeat them without divine intervention, why do such creatures exist? Kettle asked. Aquez froze at the question, momentarily caught off guard. Kettle tilted his head slightly. Are you okay? Yes, I'm fine, Aquez said quickly. I just didn't expect such a question from you. Kettle's question struck at the very roots of good and evil, of gods and demons. It was the kind of question pondered by scholars and theologians who spent their lives studying divine truths. Yet here was a barbarian, someone Aquez assumed to be unfamiliar with such matters, asking such a profound question. She steadied herself and responded, "I can explain, but it might take some time. Would that be okay?" "I don't mind. It sounds like it will be interesting," Kettle said, a spark of excitement in his eyes. "I see," Aquez replied, still slightly hesitant. Barbarians were known for disliking explanations or lengthy discussions, preferring direct, physical confrontation over intellectual debates. However, Kettle was different. He genuinely wanted to learn, to gain knowledge. He was, without a doubt, unique. He felt less like a barbarian and more like a scholar driven by curiosity. "Well then," Aquez said after taking a moment to organize her thoughts. She began her explanation, and Kettle listened intently, his expression filled with keen interest.